Good evening and welcome to the Lawrence City Council meeting. Today is Tuesday, January 16th, 2018. Mr. Clerk, roll call, please.
Council Reyes.
Present.
Council Levy.
Present.
Council LaPlante. Council Abdu.
Present.
Council Payano. Present. Council De La Cruz. Present. Council DePena. And Council Vice President
Present.
Rodriguez and Council President Vasquez.
Present. Please join me for a moment of silence. Thank you. Now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Councilors, can I please get a motion to approve the minutes from December 19th, 2017 and January 3rd, 2018?
So moved.
Abstain.
Motion has been made and properly second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Abstain.
Any opposed? Abstention, Mr. Clerk. Roll call, please.
Council Reyes.
Abstain.
Council Levy.
Okay. Yes.
Council LaPlante noted. Council Abdu.
Yes.
Council Payano. Yes. Council De La Cruz. Yes. Council DePena noted, and Council Vice President Rodriguez.
Yes.
Council President.
Yes, motion carries.
6.
I'd like to take this time to welcome all the new councilors. I know that this is going to be a very exciting term. Congratulations to Councilor Rodriguez for joining us as a Council Vice President. Moving on, public participation. Please note that you will have 2.5 minutes to speak. When speaking, please address the City Council as a whole and not any individual councilors. When you hear the first bell, that means that you have spoken for 2 minutes. By the time you hear the second bell, that means that your time is up. Please state your name and address for the record. First person is Mr. H. Mali.
In the first meeting of the year 2018, we the citizen demand from this council and Mayor Rivera to support our police officers and the seniors officers union. We the citizen are grateful to the hard work and sacrifices of Honorable Chief Fitzpatrick. We welcome the new Chief of Police, Chief Vask. Mayor Rivera now must sign our police officers' contract. We demand of Mayor Rivera and this council support our hard-working DPW workers and their union. Lawrence Public School, under impeccable leadership of Honorable Superintendent Raleigh, has been the best public school in the nation. But remember, our teachers and their union need contract. Mayor Rivera told Frank McLaughlin from the Teachers Union that Lawrence Public School, with a budget of $200 million, doesn't have any money to offer contract. We encourage all the citizens of the city where they spend in support of the contract for our teachers. Remember your campaign promise, Save Lawrence, Prosper Lawrence, only possible if you support our police officers and their union and our DPW and our brave firefighters. Mayor Rivera, in discrimination, fired the only Muslim employees of the city, Kamal Bokar. He worked many years for the library. That's act with shameful act. We encourage Kamal to sue the city to get his job back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mali. Next person is Lenin Roa.
To the council, my name is Lenin Roa, and I live at 36 Columbus Avenue. Have lived in Lawrence for about 4 years now. My problem lands on the garbage pickup. It's substandard to me, the way that it's being held. I suggest for the council and the city to hold this the company that's doing this accountable for the job that they're doing, which is substandard, I say again. We need to make the citizens aware and educate them. Hopefully, we can get a better city out of this, cleaner city, with a better understanding, conscious people in the city. I do have many things here that I can say, but the thing that I want to get done is that we need to have this company accountable. We need to hold the citizens accountable in the way of, would it be fines or whatnot, have not a police, trash police, but have them know that if they do make mistakes that are actually against the city because of throwing trash in the city and whatnot, they are going to be held accountable and have to fine them if need be, fine this company so that they can do their job the way they need to be. They're being paid some money, a lot of money, by the city. So they need to be held accountable for what they're doing, and I don't think they are. And if they are, they're not really taking it seriously. It's my belief, it's my perception of what's going on. And promote a better city, cleaner city, conscious, and do banners, whatever we need to do. Send letters to the city like we do everything else, and tell the citizenship, the citizens of the city, that we're going to be hard at this, so that we can have a better city and everything else can function in a better way. And it's my my petition to you, all of you guys. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roa.
No problem.
Next person is Dick Russell.
Good evening, councilors. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dick Russell. I reside at 34 Cross Street, and I'm kind of the self-appointed eagle eye of the city council. I can either be your best friend or I can be your worst enemy. That's your decision to make. I would like to congratulate those of you who got elected by running a fair and honest campaign. There were some who engaged in or condoned negative campaigning. I hold up pictures. This happened to me, okay? I can speak of it. This bit of negative campaigning, these photos were taken at the corner of Haverhill and Ames Street. The sign holder is totally useless, never be used again in the future. I know that there's a great deal of instances of signs being either damaged or stolen. To someone who ran a low-budget campaign based on fiscal austerity, every little bit counts or hurts, depending on one's point of view. I know the next statement is going to cause a genuine crap storm, but like Harry Truman said, I can stand the heat. I didn't particularly like the cheap shot video in Spanish that came out the day before the election calling me, amongst other things, the biggest racist in Lawrence. I respond by saying, it would take a racist to recognize a racist. I am continuing to search out who is behind the video. On to other things, I've devised a scorecard for the actions of the council. It can be posted on my Facebook page. The scorecard will have spaces for time you arrive, time you depart, number of times you ran into the council, get something to drink, and how you vote. I, quite frankly, want to make sure that you earn the money that some of you will be making. I know most of you councilors, I'm not interested. One last question. How many of the new councilors at large will suffer from the dreaded disease, Jeffrophobia? I will be keeping an eye on many of you to see who will bother attending the various neighborhood meetings in selected areas. In closing, it's time again to misquote Michael Corleone from The Godfather. It's nothing personal, councilors. It's strictly business, the city's business. As always, I thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next person is Marianela Rivera, member of the school committee in District D.
Good evening, councilors. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marianela Rivera, vice chair of the school committee, and I reside at 2A Washington Street. And I'm here to advocate for the need for an education committee. The reality is we really do need to collaborate more going forward in regards to what happens with our school budget, and even big ticket maintenance items, and the fact that we need a school building. I mean, prior to the fire at the Rollins, The Rollins wasn't 100% ADA accessible, and there was a classroom there that housed the medically fragile children, children in handicap, children in wheelchairs, and in order to access that building, they needed to be wheeled through the back behind the dumpster, and that was the only entrance in and out of the building. And then they needed to access this really scary old elevator in order to access the first floor. And in the event of a fire drill, the students needed to be carried out. And so you see these issues are happening, and so I feel like we need to, really plan things more strategically, and be more proactive about these issues, and really just work as a team, because the reality is, under this receivership, we're kept in the dark about a lot of issues. And if you review the receivership law, there's not a really good accountability system put in place. So it's up to us as elected officials and community members and parents to really hold those in charge accountable for all the issues that impact our students. And the other issue I wanted to discuss tonight was snow removal, because the reality is a lot of our kids are forced to walk in the street to and from school. And so if it takes us increasing the ticket prices, constantly towing cars, or whatever it takes, I really do feel that we need to enforce those laws, because we can't force people to, perform their civic duties, but we can enforce the laws that are designed to keep our students safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am now submitting these names to the record. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Moving on. Public hearings, we have document 53B17, is a handicap parking at 149 Saratoga Street to be deleted, placed on the agenda by Dennis A. Castillo. Mr. Clerk, please read the notice.
Document 53B, 2017 notice is hereby given. The City Council will hold a public hearing on January 16, 2018 in council chambers at 7 p.m. The purpose of said hearing is to gather testimony, information, and public input concerning a proposed amendment to the revised ordinances for the City of Lawrence to be further amended by deleting the following paragraph of Section 10.36340, the handicap parking section of the municipal code, concerning Saratoga Street east side from a point 105 feet southerly of the intersection of Fern Street to a point 125 feet southerly of the intersection of Fern Street. Persons wishing to be heard shall be afforded the opportunity as published on January 8th.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to be heard? Seeing there's none, public hearing is now closed. Councilors, what's your motion?
Motion to approve?
Motion has been made and properly second. Any discussion? Seeing there's none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next document is document 26417, proposed ordinance to regulate mobile food vendors, placed on the agenda by Assistant City Attorney Brian Corrigan. Mr. Clerk, please read the notice.
Document 264, 2017 notice is hereby given. The City Council will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, January 16th, 2018 in City Council chambers, 200 Clement Street at 7 p.m. The purpose of said hearing is to gather testimony, information, and public input concerning proposed amendment of the revised ordinances to be amended by adding a new section, Section 5.53 of the Municipal Code concerning mobile food vendors to the Lawrence Municipal Code. The proposed ordinance provides licensing requirements and regulations for mobile food vendors in the City of Lawrence, which will include subsections among its provisions describing the purpose, definitions, exemptions from the chapter, transient vendor provisions, mobile food vendor licensing requirements, promulgation of regulations, application of food vendor licenses, criteria for the issuances of said licenses, renewal, restrictions, restricted zones of operation, conditions of operation, transfers, enforcement, appeals, and grandfathered licenses, as well as severability and effective dates. The complete and unabridged copy of the ordinance was available for viewing, examination, and copying in the office of the city clerk during business hours of 8:30 to 4:30 p.m., and also made available on the City Council public hearing section of the city website, as published on January 8th.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to be heard?
Good evening, councilors. Assistant City Attorney Brian Corrigan. Just by way of some background for some of the new councilors and for those who aren't on the ordinance committee, the proposed ordinance before you came about really well, it began with, I think, from two sources. One was neighborhood complaints of, food trucks operating in residential neighborhoods and causing disturbances. And then also there was, not in Lawrence, but in other areas across the country, there were a few incidents involving food trucks. I think there were 2 explosions, I think one in Minnesota and one maybe somewhere else in the Midwest. And so it came to the attention through the fire department. Chief Moriarty raised some concerns about our regulation of food trucks, making sure that these, really these rolling kitchens with propane tanks and so forth are being inspected regularly and operating safely. So with Council President Vasquez and various officials throughout City Hall, including representatives from the mayor's office, fire department, police department, inspectional services, my office, we got together and put together this draft ordinance, which really relies in part on ordinances that are in effect in other municipalities across the Commonwealth that have active food truck business. And those would include Boston, Cambridge, and Lowell. So we have this ordinance before you, and what it does is it basically creates a separate licensing procedure specific for food trucks, which currently fall under transient vendors, which could be anyone who, any sale of any product on wheels. It could be clothing, it could be anything. We need something a little bit more specific to the food truck industry. So we came up with this separate licensing plan, and what we have before you is really some limited restrictions, one of which would be that these food trucks cannot operate within 300 feet of a dwelling or another stationary food service establishment then in operation. So another restaurant. We can't have a food truck parking in front of a restaurant that's in operation. We put forward some restricted timing, so these guys can't operate between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. That's something that's certainly up for debate. We could go in either direction, more or less restrictive. And then basically we delegate sort of the nuts and bolts, the day-to-day oversight, management, enforcement to inspectional services and the fire department. And those departments would be responsible primarily for making sure that these food truck vendors are operating safely and fairly. And lastly, there would be a provision for any food truck licensee aggrieved by a decision of inspectional services of the fire department to come before this board and appeal. So we've included that provision that appeals of any adverse decisions would come directly to the city council. So that's it in a nutshell. This has taken some time to come before you. We've had a few rounds in the ordinance committee, some good back and forth, made some changes to the proposed ordinance, and I think it's a pretty good step forward to try to start regulating this business a little bit more closely and hopefully promote, the good vendors in operation and perhaps, cause some of the other folks around the Commonwealth to look to Lawrence for operating these types of food trucks. So that's it, in a nutshell.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to be heard? Seeing there's none, public hearing is now closed. Councilors, what's your motion?
Second.
Motion to approve has been properly second. Discussion, Council Vice President Rodriguez.
Yes, I just wanted to bring that up on the appeal section.
Yes.
When you says that the appeal is going to be through this body, it also says on the ordinance, or the mobile food vendor committee, if applicable. So we want to take that section out of it, keep it. I mean, I just don't want to have in the future a confusion sense, and it sounds like that's an option. And
Right.
We want to take that out because
Yeah.
at the end of the day,
Yeah, and I would like to, based on, I think, our discussions at the ordinance committee, I think it makes sense to have the appeals come directly to this to the
Directly
council.
to the city council.
So we would remove that reference to the Mobile Food Vendor Committee, strike it, and the appeal section would say it comes to the city council, not the,
So, and then the motion gonna be,
So this
approval
is-
without that section.
So the motion by Councilor Rodriguez includes an amendment to strike the words "or to the Mobile Food Vendor Committee if applicable," which is under section 5.53.130, appeals.
So, once we remove that, then it'll be good.
Yeah, so that's part of the motion. Councilor Payano?
Just a question. The mobile food vendor committee, is that something that is currently on that?
It's currently not active. It exists, but it's not active. And it is compromised by a member of the city council, by Valda Miller, who serves as the food inspector for the city, a member of the mayor's office. I believe there is a representative from the fire department and a representative from the police department. Anyone else that I'm missing, Attorney?
I think that's right.
A follow-up. So is the reasoning that we're removing this is because that committee isn't active? We want it to go straight to city council, or is there another reason for that?
Councilor-
Because, through you, Council President, the reason that we discussed to remove that section out of there is because at the end of the day, the committee, or part of the committee, or part of the people that are on the committee are gonna be the one approving the license. So if they deny somebody's license, they're gonna have to appeal in front of the same people. And we would like to, have that separate, because, I mean, doesn't make sense that if you get denied by somebody, you go through the appealing process and it's the same person that denied you at the beginning, or probably from the same department. So that's why we would like to see only the appeals here and have the whole process in different departments.
Just, okay. Sorry, first time. How many appeals are there throughout the year?
We're enacting this ordinance for the first time, so we haven't had an appeal yet.
So there haven't been any appeals to the mobile food vendor committee?
No.
No, okay.
I have a question.
Councilor De La Cruz?
Yes, I have a concern of where do they recycle or the garbage that they collect? Do they have a specific place to put it?
So there is some language in here, but it would be much more detailed at the department level on what they need to do, but I believe it's section 5.53100, conditions of operation, talks about the fact that they have to provide compostable utensils and plates, et cetera. They have to offer a dedicated waste container for public use. They're supposed to inspect the entire area of their food truck operation regularly to make sure that people aren't dumping. So, in other words, when these guys set up in a particular location, they're supposed to provide that waste receptacle. Now, where it goes from there, I don't know. I think like any other business, they have to provide for their own, private trash disposal. But, and that would be something that they would have to have lined up in order to get the license.
I would like to see that being written because most of the garbage around the park are full of garbage that is being created by the vendors. Then they have to be responsible of where to recycle or where they're going to put their waste.
Well, and it's a good point. So coming up with this new ordinance and providing for enforcement and fines for violations, I think if these guys get hit with a, $200 or $300 fine for irresponsible trash maintenance, they're going to quickly, change their tune and start being a little bit more respectful and compliant. So that's sort of the idea here. We're trying to put in some systems so that we can regulate, enforce, and make sure that the people who are operating these businesses know what they need to do. Because right now they don't. I mean, it's like the Wild West out there with some of these trucks. Some of them aren't even licensed at all. So that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. Councilors, any further questions or comments? Councilor LaPlante?
Through you, Council President. Good evening. So, are there any current regulations with respect to the operating hours for brick-and-mortar restaurants?
I am not sure. I mean, I think, I'm trying to think if there are any 24-hour places anymore. That'd be a zoning issue, and I think it would vary from district to district, but I'm not 100% sure if there's any sort of citywide restriction on when restaurants can be open. But again, I think it would vary from district to district.
So, my concern is under one of the applications, you talked about the hours that the food vendor can operate, and we've mentioned in here, let me see if I can find it real quick. Operation hours, they could operate except for the hours at 3 a.m. to 7 a.m.
Correct.
So they could mostly, almost 24 hours, 20 hours a day, they can operate. And my sense is that that's a very broad swath, and if you're going to have a brick-and-mortar restaurant and you are going to work 24 hours, I believe you have to go before the zoning board to make that happen. Because what you want to do is you take into consideration neighborhoods, areas, et cetera, as we go through these things. In here, we're just sending a carte blanche check. You can do this between those hours. And to be consistent, it seems to me as though we want to have something that reflects the same principles, the same regulations for the bricks and mortar companies, and don't treat them any differently than the food vendor folks. So I'm not sure what to do, except to say that I would like to see this change in some manner where we're able to model it after the same kind of principle, restrictions and regulations that currently govern the brick and mortar restaurants and takeout restaurants.
Yeah, no, fair point. I would suggest perhaps an amendment along the lines of notwithstanding the provisions of that particular section, which is 5.53100 subsection A, no mobile food vendor shall be allowed to operate outside of the time restrictions imposed upon brick and mortar establishments in that particular zoning district. I mean, I think, if they're going to park in an area where, let's say there are few restaurants that have to shut down at 12 o'clock, they would have to shut down by 12 o'clock. If they're in an area that does not have that restriction, and again, I haven't looked into, because this is just coming up tonight, I don't know if, let's say, for example, out here in front of City Hall, if a food truck could park here across the common and be outside of a district that imposes any restriction, if you know what I mean. I mean, there could be some areas where there are none. But I think if that basic amended language might cover what you're concerned about. So if they're going to set up shop in a particular district, they have to comply with the same restrictions that a brick and mortar establishment would have to comply with, basically.
So I'd like to offer, through you, Mr. President, who is the author of the amendment?
Councilor Rodriguez.
Would the author accept a friendly amendment to include the language that was just articulated by the city attorney?
Accept that, yeah.
Thank you.
Councilors, any further questions or comments? Councilor Payano.
Thank you, Mr. President. There was so on Section 553-090, restriction zones of operations, no food vendor shall operate within 300 feet of a dwelling. So 300 feet, is that about the length of a football field? Or close to that?
It is.
So for example, the different vendors that park on commons, on the common, or around the common, I would say those are probably within the 300 feet of a dwelling. So how would they be affected?
How would the vendor be affected? Or
yeah, so they wouldn't be able to park there anymore.
Right. I think, unless we're going to go out and map the entire city, with areas of allowed use, I mean, the burden is going to be on the vendor not to operate within 300 feet of a dwelling, so there are going to be some limitations. Yeah, I mean, I could think, as I think of the buildings around the common, you've got residential dwellings across the way on Haverhill Street, you've got some residential over here in the Bay State building. I'm not sure if you have residential as you work your way down towards Jackson Street, but yeah, I mean, this is the idea. I mean, again, this is really one of the two areas of concern that prompted this whole new law, which was neighborhood complaints about, people who couldn't sleep because, these loud food trucks were operating right out front of their homes at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So, yeah, there's going to be some burden on the vendor to think about where they operate. And if we find that they're operating within 300 feet of a dwelling, we're going to be able to enforce the law and cite them.
Follow up? So why 300 feet? How did you come into that?
That was basically borrowed from, I think, Boston and Cambridge, both of whom, as I mentioned earlier, have had an ordinance for mobile food vendors on the books for some time and actually have a very active food vendor community. So we borrowed some of their, language, and that's basically it in a nutshell. Otherwise it's arbitrary. It could be 400 feet, could have been 200 feet. 300 feet seems to be a pretty good distance. If you any larger, and I mean, you're going to really start restricting the zones of allowed operation. And we could see if we continue to get complaints from people because they're too close to residential dwellings and people can't sleep because of the noise, then we're going to have to take a look at this and maybe increase it.
That's great.
To Councilor Rodriguez, I don't know if you would take into account perhaps lowering the length of the 300 feet. 'Cause I'm just thinking about what areas within Lawrence you could actually comply. When you start thinking about Essex Street, basically the areas where currently these vendors work, there's usually a dwelling within those 300 feet. So I think it'd be almost killing off that entire industry if you go along with 300.
Agree. So it's an amendment?
I mean, I can't, make just, I wouldn't want to come up with just a random, random number. You studied this, so I'm kind of, putting it on, putting it on you to see what would make more sense than 300. So if 300 is the length of a football field, right? And you start thinking about the current areas where these people are currently making their business, I don't think that 300 would make sense.
Yep, I agree with you. So if the council wants, we can reduce it by 50%. So 150 feet.
Is that part of an amendment to your motion?
You want to make it an amendment?
So it's a friendly amendment?
I accept the motion, the amendment.
Councilors, I'd like to provide some information in regards to the conversation. I had the opportunity to participate in the meetings that we had, and the restriction proposed by Councilor LaPlante was brought up, but the police department, I don't think, will be too inclined to support it for the reason that the city of Lawrence, the way that it's zoned, the district overlapped regularly, and if we were to create an ordinance that will go based on the district zoning, it will be difficult to be enforced. So I don't think that the police department will be in support of us creating an ordinance that is not based on a specific time frame, but rather on the zoning of, throughout the city, because enforcement will be extremely challenging. They will have to know exactly each one of the borders for each one of the district, which is extremely difficult. And when we talk about district, we're not talking about the voter districts. We're talking about the commercial zones, which are very different than the voting district as we know it. If you have looked at a map, there are streets that are literally 4 or 5 different districts within one single street, and it will be extremely complicated to know, you know, all of the details for it. I think only 1 or 2 people in the city know each one of the districts, and they're Mr. Dan McCarthy, who will not be an enforcer, and if I'm not mistaken, probably Sue Fink is familiarized with the zoning of the city, so it will be extremely challenging for enforcement purposes. If that's the wish of the council to continue, that's something worth conversation, but enforcement will be extremely challenging for this ordinance. Councilor LaPlante?
Yeah, so in light of that discussion, which I think, Council President, you make a very good point, I still think that there's the element of fairness and equity that we need to apply on these, to this regulation or this ordinance as it applies to making sure that our brick and mortar establishments are as competitive as our mobile vendors. But your point is well taken. So I guess what I would do is this. I would request that the author remove the amendment that I offered, and in its place, put in a, what I would think would be a decent compromise, not knowing the full hours, but rather knowing that our bars and nightclubs end at a certain hour, and that don't go beyond those hours in front of those areas. So that way, the police department knows if that bar or pub is open till 1, that food vendor is closed at 1 o'clock as well, wherever that is, and that would make it a little more manageable.
Councilor De Peña?
You have an idea how many trucks operate in the city?
Counselor, as of, this is a few months old, bear in mind, when we were before the ordinance subcommittee, but I believe we had counted 17 licensed mobile food vendors. Whether they were still in active business at that point, it's hard to say. We also had another 30-some-odd mobile food vendors, the names and the owners of these operations who had at one point in time been licensed but were not at that particular time. So going back a few months, we had 17 licensed vendors. And that figure may have changed a little bit in the last few months. I don't know if, you know, it's a seasonal type thing, if they're more active in the summer, or maybe vice versa. But anyways, those are the numbers that we had as of a few months ago when we were before the ordinance committee.
Yeah, President, I think no matter what, how many ordinance, if the city not take any action for enforce regulation, nothing change. You know, that's my point.
Thank you. Councilor De La Cruz?
I have a concern. I know that most of those business, they operate after they close the restaurants and
Bars.
the clubs.
Yeah.
Then they won't be able to make money to pay for, or to make money for them.
Yeah. I think that's why we, I mean, this was actually, may have even been suggested by the police department in participating in our series of meetings. I think they came up with the 3 o'clock time frame to sort of coincide with an hour or two after the closing of the nightclub establishment, to let these guys go for it a couple of hours after everybody, you know, leaves the club. So in any event, that's how we came up with the time frame. I understand the concern. You know, I think we're trying to establish some fairness here. We don't want these mobile food vendors unfairly competing with the brick and mortar establishments, and so that's why we have restricted zones. They can't be within 300 feet of another one, of a brick and mortar. And in any event, yeah, I don't know if we're ever going to get it perfect, but the idea is to, to try to get some regulation here and at least start getting these vendors licensed, and so we know who's out there. They go through the inspection process. There's going to be some, it's not going to be a perfect process to get them to comply with all the rules and regulations, but I think over time they'll start to understand what we're trying to accomplish here. And again, as I said earlier, once you get a $200 ticket for violating, whether it's the time restriction or the trash restriction or being too close to a residential building, I think you're going to quickly get people to start basically operating fairly. That's all we're trying to do is get these guys to operate safely and fairly and not bother the residential neighbors while they're trying to make a buck. So I'm not sure we're ever going to get a perfect time. Restricting them between the hours of 3 and 7 was something that, as the committee went through this several times, was the time frame that we came up with. But could go either way.
Councilor Giovanni Rodriguez.
Sure. I just want to follow up on the time. If we go with a closing time of, around how the club functions and bars, we basically setting up this ordinance to fail because people are going to be asking and buying food and staying at a place after the club. And usually, if we think about public safety, that's what we want, because if you're drinking, you stay for 2 hours, most likely, and you eat something, most likely the alcohol level of your body gonna reduce. And that's another concern, that if we just shut down at the same time that the club are shutting down, basically it could be more difficult for the people and the public safety as well. That's another portion that we're not considering, and that's why I'm in favor of keeping it to 3 a.m. because that way we have either on Friday 1 hour and Saturday 2 hours, and the rest of the day, the rest of the week, only 1 hour because club and bars shut down at 1 o'clock. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Rodriguez. I have Councilor LaPlante and Councilor Payano.
I was just going to wonder, there was a request to see if we could have my amendment withdrawn, because right now it's been accepted as a friendly amendment. So is that, will you withdraw my amendment that was friendly and take that off the table because of the complexity of the zoning?
There's a request to...
That's part of that, and the other part is I think that we're stumbling across a very good question. Is there anybody here tonight from Public Safety, more specifically the Police Department? No? Because that would be a question I would ask them if they were here, because I think that this debate is going to a certain area, which is what makes sense. One counselor suggested that we should keep it open a little bit longer, and if we keep it after the bars close, because the counselors suggest that would allow the alcohol content to dissipate, for people to get food and things to relax a little bit. The other part of it is if you keep more people here later and later, then you're keeping people here later and later, and it's more of an opportunity for there to be problems. I don't have an answer to that question. That would be a question I would like to ask the police department to see where they fall on that. If they say to me that it is better for us to have them hang around for an hour or two after the bars close, that's one thing. If they say to me, no, we really like them to get back home, get back where they are, back away from this area, because having gone with the police department a few times on ride-alongs and seeing what happens when the bars close, there's just a crush of people coming out of the bars all at the same time, and it is a nightmare. So I don't know if having these things last longer is a good thing or a bad thing. It concerns me a little bit, and we're going to go down this road a bit. It just concerns me that we're going to, I don't want to make the wrong decision on this, because we can exacerbate what potentially could be already a very challenging and difficult situation. I'm going to be making, if there's no other speakers, Council President, I'll very shortly be asking a motion to table.
I have, so the motion...
But I'll hold off until...
I do have Councilor Payano and Councilor Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. President. So when this was brought about, I think you mentioned that constituents had concerns over perhaps the noise level coming from these trucks. From what, do we have an idea from what areas we were receiving the most complaints from?
So both, this is something that Councilor Reyes and myself have worked on for a little while. I know, Councilor Reyes, you want to address a little bit? So most of the concerns were coming from Park Street, Lawrence Street, Bennington.
Park Street is actually the most,
Most.
you know, right now, this is a complaint that we have, and thank you, Councilor LaPlante, because I was gonna ask to everyone just to leave it on the table and just to have more time to work with this before we pass this on, since a lot of question has been arise, which I believe that we have to make sure that whenever we pass this on, we know that we're gonna be able to enforce. Right now, we can say 3 o'clock, 150, but if we don't have anyone to follow up with them and make that possible, whatever we say is gonna stay here. Because when this is coming from of ordinance, we continue saying, and Councilor Rodriguez can second that, and we repeat it over and over, even if it is a renewed license. You have to be moving every 2 hours if you don't have a line. This is not the case. And I can tell you that District B is actually where all the vendors are parking.
There's a large, another, I can remember based on the map that we were looking at, Saratoga, Bennington, Park, Lawrence,
Jackson,
Haverhill, a portion of Broadway in between Park and Manchester Street, we've received complaint from. But the residents that were really behind the steering wheel to make this ordinance possible were the residents from Saratoga,
Park and Bunker Hill.
Bunker Hill. They were the ones behind the steering wheel to push this forward.
Mr. President, I think I do believe that perhaps that this should be tabled. I think one of the things that we have to think about is just, even with 100 feet requirement, just thinking about the city and seeing where could someone actually park their car and not be disobeying this ordinance, because we don't want it to fail just from the start. I know that you mentioned that we couldn't necessarily do zones throughout the city, but perhaps there's a potential to do a combination of both. You know, for example, if we designated like Essex Street or or something like that as the only one zone, then maybe that would be easier to enforce than just different sections. So that could be potentially something we look at.
And I think that's a good point that has been brought up by Councilor Payano. I don't know if the attorney were to have a map that we had discussed during the meeting. Do you have that accessible with you?
I don't think so.
Yeah, we signal specific areas throughout the city, and I think I could work with you to find the citywide map that we identify.
I do remember the discussion. I don't remember ever creating any sort of a map, but just a bit of side information. The city of Boston, for example, they have a lottery system for specific locations. So, I mean, we could come up with, instead of restricted zones, we could come up with a set of allowed zones. I mean, and just basically say, here's where you need to be. If we find you anywhere else, you're out of compliance. But certainly something to think about. I don't know where, you raise a good point. I don't know where people can set up that takes them far enough away from residential dwellings and brick and mortar establishments. But there have to be some places where these guys can set up.
Follow up, I think one of the major problems is that Lawrence is so small. While something like this could work in Boston, makes perfect sense. Boston is huge. In Lawrence, maybe because of previous rules in the past, there's a lot of, you look at Jackson Street, Lawrence Street, there's a lot of business establishments that are open very late while there's housing all around that. So that's definitely something to consider. And I just don't want to kill off the entire industry by passing something that, that's still, you know, they might continue following as well.
Thank you. Councilor Reyes?
No, I just want to encourage all of us, if I may, like, we can review this, and if we have any question in the meantime, before this is coming back in front of us, we can call Attorney Garland and ask all the question and add whatever we think before we come here and open a discussion that, you know, we might can have all that information.
Is there a motion to table?
Motion to, I second the motion of Councilor.
Councilor Rodriguez?
Can we vote on some of the stuff that we discussed, and later on, we don't have to go back and discuss the sentence?
That's part of the motion already, so
We just,
why would we vote on it separately? I think it's already part of the motion that you propose. So the motion that you propose is to approve the document with the changes. If you bear with me,
The changes of the appeal and the drilling.
so that's already part of the motion. So when we vote on it, we will be final, that will be the final decision. So we don't have to vote on each item separately.
Question, Mr. President. In that motion that's being tabled, is the friendly amendment that Councilor Plant asked for, was that removed?
That has been removed.
Thank you.
Yep.
Two amendments.
So there's a motion on the floor.
to
Is there-
table, I
It's
second
been
the
properly
motion.
second. All those in favor to table, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next document is document 33917, stop sign two-way, Marvel Ave at Oregon Ave. Mr. Clerk, please read the notice.
Document 339, 2017, notice is hereby given. The City Council will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, January 16, 2018, in council chambers at 7 p.m. The purpose of said hearing is to gather testimony, information, and public input concerning the proposed amendment to the revised ordinances for the City of Lawrence to be further amended by adding a new paragraph to the stop sign section of the municipal code to be inserted in proper order. Marble Ave, northbound drivers on Marble Ave and at Oregon Ave. To the extent there exist any ordinances to the contrary, they are hereby repealed in that respect only. Persons wishing to be heard shall be afforded the opportunity as published on January 8th.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to be heard? Seeing there's none, public hearing is now closed. Councilors, what's your motion?
Motion to approve and waive the 30 days.
Second.
Motion has been made and properly second. Seeing there's no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Document 34417, handicap parking, 18 Summit Ave. James Orlando. Mr. Clerk, please read the notice.
Document 334, 2017, notice is hereby given. The City Council will hold a public hearing Tuesday, January 16, 2018, in council chambers at 7 p.m. The purpose of said hearing is to gather testimony, information, and public input concerning the proposed amendment to the revised ordinances by adding the following new paragraph to the handicap parking section to be inserted in proper order. Summit Ave, south side from a point 200 feet easterly of the intersection of Prospect Street to a point 220 feet easterly of the intersection of Prospect Street. Persons wishing to be heard shall be afforded the opportunity as published on January 8th.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to be heard? Seeing there's none, public hearing is now closed. Councilors, what's your motion?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion has been made and properly second. Seeing there's no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Document 34917, handicap parking, 66 Osgood Street, Lara Roman. Mr. Clerk, please read the notice.
Document 349, 2017. Notice is hereby given. The City Council will hold a public hearing Tuesday, January 16th, in council chambers, 200 Common Street at 7 p.m. The purpose of said hearing is to gather testimony, information, and public input concerning the proposed amendment of the revised ordinances for the City of Lawrence by deleting the following paragraph from the handicap parking section of the municipal code. Osgood Street, east side, to a point 65 feet southerly of the intersection of Abbott Street to a point 85 feet southerly of the intersection of Abbott Street. Persons wishing to be heard shall be afforded the opportunity as published January 8th.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to be heard? Seeing there's none, public hearing is now closed. Councilors, please note that this is a handicap parking to be deleted at 66 Oscar Street. Is there a motion on the floor?
So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made and properly second. No, any discussion? Seeing there's none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Document 39917, Lawrence Fire Department, petition to adopt Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 148, Section 26, automatic sprinklers, placed on the agenda by Assistant City Attorney Brian Corrigan and on behalf of Fire Chief Brian Moriarty. Mr. Clerk, please read the notice.
Document 399, 2017. Notice is hereby given the City Council will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, January 16, 2018, 200 Common Street at 7 p.m. The purpose of said hearing is to gather testimony, information, and public input concerning proposed acceptance of the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 148, Section 26I, concerning multiple dwelling units, new construction automatic sprinkler systems by the City of Lawrence by and through its City Council. The provisions of Mass General Law were published and made available via the petition as published. A complete and unabridged copy of the proposed ordinance was available for viewing, examining, and copying at the office of the city clerk during business hours 8:30 to 4:30 p.m., and also made available and published and posted on the City Council Public Hearing website section. And at that location was published. Persons wishing to be heard shall be afforded the opportunity as published on January 8th.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to be heard?
Good evening, councilors. Brian Corrigan, once again. I have with me tonight Chief Moriarty, who can speak on this proposal much more technically and eloquently than I could, but it seems, I will simply say that it seems to be a no-brainer for the city of Lawrence. Automatic sprinklers prevent fires, save lives. We've had a number of incidents here in the last couple of years that may have been mitigated at least if we had a more if we had an ordinance such as this, which is requiring automatic sprinklers in new construction and existing dwellings that are substantially rehabilitated. So that would basically be the equivalent of what we would all think of as like a gut job. If you're going to be taking the existing building down to the studs, you'd be required on a 4+ unit building to install automatic sprinklers. But any technical questions about fire code issues, I think Chief Moriarty is certainly the person more qualified to speak on those.
Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to be heard? Seeing there's none, public hearing is now closed. Councilors, what's your motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion has been made.
Second with discussion?
Discussion, Councilor Payano, Councilor Reyes, Councilor Abdu.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I was just a question around 4 dwelling units. What was the reasoning behind 4 and not 3?
Bear in mind, Counselor, this is a, Section 26I is a provision of the general laws that was enacted, I believe, in or about 1990. So this has been on the books statewide for many years. It's one of those statutes that we find come across periodically that only take effect in a municipality once the legislative body accepts it. So we're asking basically the council to accept the provisions of the state law to make it effective in Lawrence. So what you see there in the proposed ordinance is verbatim from the state law. We didn't come up with the numbers or any of the other provisions. We took this is straight from state law. It could be, I suppose, amended at this level. In fact, at the ordinance level, we did add, we did make one amendment, which is to define substantial rehabilitation based on a fairly recent Supreme Judicial Court case. So you should have that language in the proposed ordinance that was added at the subcommittee level. So hopefully that answers your question.
Councilor Reyes.
It was basically the same question that Councilor Payano was asking. Thank you.
Councilor Abdu.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would concur with Councilors Reyes and Payano. I was interested in the number 4. It makes sense that it was boilerplate language from the state. I do think it's a question we should grapple with because, as we know, many of the older homes in the inventory are 3-family homes. And, you know, oftentimes when we read about the fires that take a home down and the one next one, the one next one, usually 3-family. I'd be interested to know the fire chief's thoughts, and perhaps we should have further conversation about is 4 appropriate or 3, or Chief, I can be convinced.
Good evening, Chief.
Good evening, councilors. Brian Moriarty, Fire Chief, City of Lawrence. Number 4 came from lobbyists fighting against us. Firefighters, fire chiefs across the state, Commonwealth, would love to have sprinklers in every home, single-family home. They save lives. They make our job a lot easier. If you want to change that, I'd love to see that to be triple deckers. But also keep in mind that it's only after substantial rehabilitation. So this wouldn't be a retroactive law that we'd go back and say, okay, all you people who own triple deckers have to put sprinklers in. It would only if it was stripped down to the bones. And substantial, like new is the interpretation.
So, through you, Mr. President, at the state level, when I go in and rehabilitate a building that trips ADA is 30%. What does this standard call for a substantial renovation, or as Mr. Corrigan called it, a gut job?
Well, that's one of the new things that came out with the Holyoke case was like new quality. In the National Building Code, they have a percentage of, I think it's over 50%, and you have to have changed walls. Where this, you have to change walls, change doors, where this will allow us to have the same doors, same bedrooms, but it's all brand new. Down to the studs, new wiring, new plumbing, new sheetrock, it's all brand new, like new condition, which is far better for us.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate the input, but it doesn't sound, I mean, I'd support this because it makes sense for saving lives, but it doesn't sound like there'd be a lot of effect. There's not a lot of total gut jobs or renovations of 4+ unit buildings other than new apartments, which are required to have sprinklers anyhow.
I don't disagree, but we have to start somewhere. So
No, I totally understood. It's totally understood. Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilor De La Cruz.
I have a question, Chief. Do we have so many 4 units building in the community that we need the 4%, or do we have more 3 units building in the community?
I don't think I understood your question.
Okay, you said that for 4 units that we need 450 of the rehabilitation, right?
This applies to any unit with 4 or more living spaces, 4 apartments.
Okay.
And what the 50% part was, I was talking about the National Building Code, where this allows us just to say as new. So the 50% part is not.
Okay.
Correct.
I understand now. Thank you.
Councilors, any further questions? Attorney Corrigan. If the council wished to change it from 4 units to 3 units, would it have to be presented as a home rule petition, given that it's a state law, or can we do it at the local level, can we implement it at the local level with the 3-unit rule?
I think we could do it at the local level. It would not, obviously, it would not be through this particular matter that's before the council today. This is simply to adopt what's already on the books at the state level. If what the council is more inclined to do is to make this even more more fire code friendly and go down to perhaps 3 units or even less at some point, that would be through a new proposed ordinance, which we could easily do. But I think, as the chief alluded to, this is a pretty good start. I think obviously there was a reason why the legislature came up with 4+ units. When we start getting into smaller units, this could become cost prohibitive for a lot of people. Not that that should be the overriding factor, but I think this particular proposal is a good start, and there's no reason why we couldn't immediately move forward with another proposed ordinance to make it even more friendly. That is, lowering the number of units to which this automatic sprinkler requirement would apply. So I would simply propose that if the council is thinking along those lines, that we adopt what's already on the books and then start thinking about whether it's appropriate to go even further than what the state has proposed for us.
Councilors, I will encourage all of us to consider that as a recent victim of a fire in a triple-decker, I think that this is very critical and necessary in the city of Lawrence. So I would encourage that we all work together in creating an ordinance that will ensure that we could save as many houses in the future as possible. But at this point, I would like to call the question. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you, Attorney.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have communications from the mayor, city officials, and the city attorney. Document 1518, homeless presentation. It was placed on the agenda by Vilma Martinez Dominguez from the planning office. Good evening.
Good evening, City Council members. Again, my name is Vilma Martinez Dominguez. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Lawrence. And as many of you know, the new Homelessness Initiatives Coordinator's position is fairly new to the city. And so it was instituted back in October, or maybe 2016. And we hired someone, Anil DaCosta, in April. This was a collaborative effort between the Community Development Department and a lot of the efforts that the Mayor Soltasos was doing. And we were seeing the issue of homelessness, particularly chronic homelessness among individuals, as an issue that was popping up. You know, it didn't matter which working group was there. And so we were able to leverage some funding to start this position. From the get-go, our intention was to really come before City Council after a certain point of time, just to give you an update on what's going on, what has happened since we instituted the position and since Anil has been on board, both to give you an understanding of what his role is, the work that has been done to date, and talk a little bit about what are the plans moving forward. So I would love to invite Anil DaCosta, the Homelessness Initiatives Coordinator, to come up and do a brief presentation. Thank you.
Council.
I'm not blocking you, right? No.
All right. Council, so again, my name is Anil DaCosta. I'm the Homelessness Initiatives Coordinator for the City of Lawrence. And I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of efforts to date, what we've done so far, and how we plan to proceed. So you'll see that the position was instituted October 2016. I didn't start until April 3rd, 2017. And it's funded through a combination of DON funds, as outlined by Lawrence General, and the city's general funds. So my responsibilities, I hope you could all see that. I'll just read it out loud just in case. Cross-coordinate inclusive efforts between nonprofits, the municipality, and state agencies to prevent homelessness, particularly among those living in encampments and temporary shelters. In that instance, when we say prevent homelessness, we mean preventing it from getting to the chronic level. As outlined by HUD, the chronic definition of homelessness is being homeless and in an uninhabitable environment for the equivalent of 1 year or 1 year over 3-year period. Work with community leaders, city officials, community agencies, and relevant coalitions to find overlapping gaps in services. So we did a root cause analysis with the help of the Institute of Community Health, and to look at socioeconomic factors and the health disparities within them, how they affect local systems in terms of our public health, as well as the health of those that are on the streets. Next, develop and coordinate the development of thoughtful, coordinated, and collaborative action plans and process to resolve the presence of encampments in the city. So this is a public health and a public safety concern. I'll talk in a little bit about the Casey Bridge encampment. Access and connecting homeless or at-risk individuals with appropriate resources and services via referrals and linkage to a wider network. So I'm not a case manager. I don't do the casework on an individual basis. I refer out. So I do not provide the rides to detox, the one-on-one budget assessments. You know, I don't come up with their plans for them. I pass it on to agencies and work with the agencies to provide a wraparound service. Promote housing first method for ending homelessness. Permanent housing opportunities matched with the right level of services based on best practices. Housing First is a model that's been used by HUD for years now. It's really got its grounding at the veteran population. That's where they really tried the Housing First method, and they come to find that it has an 80% success rate in Boston. Support Office of Planning and Development in negotiating, preparing, and monitoring, evaluating contracts and programs relating to preventing and ending homelessness. We'll talk about that later with the ESG. And then finally, I act as a consultant and a liaison for the mayor's office. So I work with the nonprofits on behalf of the city. I coordinate efforts with them, and anything that's related to homelessness that a constituent may be facing, the mayor's office calls me. I provide them with the referrals and the guidance around navigating the social service system. So some of my major accomplishments to date. Protocols and for groups providing services for the Casey Bridge encampment. That was no easy undertaking. That posed several concerns for the city. So that was a public safety issue, a youth issue because it was in close proximity to Kids Start. It was an environmental issue because of its relation to where it is against the river. And it's also a housing issue because there were housing units set to be opened behind the encampment in the Pacific Mills. I worked with law enforcement, DPW, inspectional services, multiple agencies to help stabilize individuals as they went through this transition. All the individuals under there were offered services, whether it be detox, rehabilitative programming, or case management. And then in addition, I did ongoing monitoring of the area as well as other encampments throughout the city. With that, I assisted Brady Sullivan in opening up those housing units. Coordination of care. I established and created the Homelessness Initiatives Working Group and a 5-year plan after that to reduce homelessness in Lawrence. And this is through the help of ICH and their consultants, the Institute of Community Health. We'll be looking at health disparities and what is best for public safety, as well as those that are currently homeless and whatever health issues they may be facing. Creation of a resource guide prioritized around homelessness, specifically in Lawrence for individuals. And what that is a resource I started to make that has all of the resources that we have within the city and some outside of the city that also serve our population. So that is set for publication and dissemination. In addition, I serve as liaison for the homeless and the nonprofits during library hours on Fridays. Since we started this, we've had more than 100 people visit us, and I've connected them to agencies including VinFin, Column Health, the Veterans Office, VNOC, and Elliott Services. And then in addition, I coordinate the placement of the Greater Lawrence Family Health Center's mobile unit. And I do that by reaching out to various property owners throughout the city. And that is to increase health access, not just for homeless individuals, but for those in shelters as well. Coordination of care. Beyond the inclusiveness of the working group, I've collaborated with 46 different organizations and 16 departments and offices to address issues around homelessness, public safety, and health disparities. That's everybody from church groups, that's colleges, that's DMH, that's law enforcement. So it's a very well-rounded scale. Established and strengthened partnerships with the Lawrence Police Department, Fire Department, DPW, Office of Planning Development, Inspectional Services, and our other city departments, as well as emergency services through LGH and Holy Family. Many of which attend monthly meetings or every other month meetings with the mayor about rising trends and what we're seeing amongst the population. Conducted a root cause analysis, localized on Lawrence, look at systemic barriers, what's keeping homelessness going, what is keeping people on the streets, what are the barriers they face that prevent them from accessing services, what is keeping them from being stabilized. That's what resulted in the 5-year plan. I supported Lazarus House and the Good Shepherd Center's emergency overnight efforts that we just faced over a week ago now, which included the heavy storm. So that meant helping to shelter about 32 individuals on a nightly basis because it was below 10 degrees. So that was no easy undertaking, but that was also coordinated with some of our police officers as well. All right, plans moving forward. Publication and wide dissemination of the resource listing. So for those that are in the city that are working in the nonprofit sector, this will be a vital tool for them. Pretty much anything that could come up, there'll be an answer in that book for them, and if it isn't there, then that means they're gonna have to refer to Boston. Strengthening and expanding the referral system within the city and building capacity amongst providers. So with that, I'm really increased the communication between all the nonprofits. Now each nonprofit knows more what each other is doing and how we could partner and overlap. An example of that would be how Column Health now works with Elliott Community Services to provide referrals and outpatient rehabilitative care. In addition, protocols and procedures around syringe donations and collection to optimize public safety. We've seen that this has been a growing concern in the city. We find it in many public spaces. So by working with our needle exchange at Greater Lawrence Family Health Center, how do we limit the amount of syringes that we're finding in public spaces while also helping to stop the spread of disease such as HIV and Hep C? The point in time count will be coming up at the end of the month. That is when we get our count of how many homeless we have on the streets. Last year we had 101. The year before that we had 45. The reason for that increase is we just changed our outreach method and the best way to gather that collection. There's still the same amount the year previous. Meet with policymakers to educate them on barriers and gaps for homelessness services. That's what I'm doing right now. Continue to work with consultant from the Institute of Community Health to learn more about best practices for working with the chronically homeless population. Each city has its own needs when working with this population. Lawrence, like many other cities such as Camden, New Jersey, we are right on the border of another state. We are small, we have a river, and we were once, like them, an industrial city that has now seen much of their big business leave. In addition, continue to work, research additional grant opportunities to support and advance the work. So keeping an eye on different funding streams that might be able to help us prevent the rise in homelessness, but also help us to prevent homelessness on an individual and family basis. Important local facts on homelessness. So the issue of homelessness isn't new. You know, this has been around for a long time. According to our 2017 point in time count, we estimate chronically unsheltered homeless to be around 100. And I estimate there to be about 15 to 30 more individuals now. A large part of that is due to, you know, varying factors, whether it be opioids or fires or domestic violence, trauma. I'll get to different root causes in a bit. In terms of our sheltered homeless, according to Greater Lawrence Family Health Center, we have around 600 individuals that are homeless in this city, and that includes children. So when we think about homeless, usually we think about those that we see on the streets, the panhandlers, those in encampments, but no, homeless could mean various things. So we're talking about people that are in apartments shacking up with family members without a landlord's consent. We're talking about people living in vehicles, people squatting in abandoned buildings. We're talking about couch surfing. We're talking about people that are just trying to find any storage space or the back of a pickup truck for the night. Lawrence Public Schools is now serving, well, the new number is probably around 270 homeless students. And that was a pretty high number even before we had the influx of people coming from Puerto Rico that have now recently enrolled in Lawrence Public Schools. During the most recent emergency overnights at the Good Shepherd Center, we had 63 individuals that sought shelter from the elements. The youngest one was 20 years old. He grew up here in Lawrence, and, you know, though he feels he knows the community and he doesn't want to leave the city, he does consider doing so, even though it means leaving his resources and supports. So we do have quite the unaccompanied youth population as well. And what that means is unaccompanied youth is people 26 and under, between the ages of 15 and 26, that are homeless. Next. Causes of homelessness. So there are the obvious reasons for homelessness, but these are based specifically on what we found in Lawrence through a root cause analysis with the Homelessness Initiatives Working Group, as well as the accounts of the homeless individuals that we serve in the library on Fridays. So we have mental illness and disability. That's anything from severe autism to bipolar. We have domestic violence, and that includes males as well. We have post-traumatic stress disorder, and that is amongst populations that are other than veterans. We have a lot of that correlates back to domestic violence. Rising rent rises and evictions. A lot of those that we do come across did have jobs when they became homeless. They just did not have enough to maintain rent. Medical ailments, physical disability, addiction. That's one of the ones that most people know, but when we look at the 600 people that are homeless within the city, I wouldn't say 10% even make the addiction level. Fire and natural devastation. We still have some individuals from the Bennington Street fire that are still homeless. In addition, LGBTQ, gender identity and sexual orientation, that is one of the major reasons that we find unaccompanied youth so prevalent. Unplanned pregnancy, large number amongst teens and young adults. Unemployment, and if they are in unemployment or they are collecting disability, it's not enough to keep them housed while also getting the proper medical treatment. Family and spouse death. That is something that we are noticing more and more with the older population, usually above the age of 55. And those with a history of incarceration. Because of their history of incarceration, they're not able to access a lot of the housing that is available, and if they are able to, they aren't able to attain jobs that can, you know, correlate to the price in which they have to pay. So why Lawrence? That's a question I'm asked pretty often. Why do the homeless come to Lawrence? So there's two ways that we're going to look at this part. Aside from the opioid availability, homeless are attracted to our large nonprofit sector and aiding state agencies. So for those that are addicted to opiates, we see that they come and they are coming in an increasing number. The reason for that is because we have fentanyl in the city, and it comes at the cheapest price in the state at the moment. So that's why we have people coming from as far as Brockton here to Panhandle so that they could support their habit. On the other side of that, the majority of the homeless are attracted to our large nonprofit sector. We're a small city that's easy to navigate with a very strong nonprofit sector that works well with each other. We have various partnerships that other cities can't replicate. We also have various state agencies here. If we go down Merrimack Street, you'll see that we have DMH in there, we have DPH in there, we also have DTA in there. So a lot of the government agencies are located within the city. In addition to that, we have very strong food access. You can't starve here in Lawrence. We have various food pantries, and we have 3 soup kitchens. So if you ever see somebody panhandling saying that they're hungry, just tell them to walk 4 blocks, they'll get something. In addition, yeah, we have a lot of established institutions that are there to help our constituents. Historically, Lawrence has always served in a certain population that doesn't make the highest monetary value compared to the surrounding area. Our income makers cannot compete with that of North Andover. So we have a lot of things in place for them. Greater Lawrence Community Action Council, our various pantries, Lazarus House. Those were in place for our populations, but those resources are also conducive to living outside and being in a transient population where you don't have one designated area that you call your own. So, in addition, rent prices are more affordable than other communities. I know that when we go online, you don't see that many apartments at that good of a price, but that's also because according to our 2016 urban study on housing, we still have a 2% rental availability in the city. That's very low. And yeah, food access. All right, so these are some of the misconceptions that we deal with on a daily basis. All our homeless are addicted. That is far from true. No. The majority of the homeless that we do work with, they don't have an addiction. A lot more have a mental illness than they do have an addiction, though if you have an addiction, you are most likely going to have a mental illness. It's called a dual diagnosis. But a lot of the homeless that we find, they're in their position due to circumstances. Whether it be one family member lost a job, a person died, or the landlord just raised the rent. You know, a lot of people just don't have enough saved in order to maintain stabilized. Next, we have several emergency shelters. No, we don't. All of our shelters are at capacity right now. Daybreak is no longer considered the emergency shelter that we used to know it. It now has BSAS programming as outlined by DPH. BSAS is the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services, and that is more of, if you looked at what they do, it's more of rehabilitative inpatient care because they do try to provide a wraparound with case management and they do outgoing referrals to different places. So there is always a waiting list. It couldn't be considered an emergency shelter. And Lazarus House has a family shelter that says emergency shelter. The reason that's considered an emergency shelter is because they don't require a referral from DTA. Regardless, they are always at capacity, and right now there are more than 60 families on the waiting list. They aren't from here. We hear that a lot as well. The vast majority of IV users, not from Lawrence. When we look at the large portion of homeless that are from here, you know, they're not as easy to spot. They're not walking around with backpacks. They're not panhandling. They're not, you know, doing drug deals in the middle of the street. It's, you know, it's a very different population that we're talking about. So when we look at those that we are working with, yeah, the vast majority of the homeless are from here, and it's to the point where we don't have shelter space. So right now, it's mostly Haverhill and Lowell that are taking care of our homeless. They have more shelter capacity and more resources out there. Questions?
That's it.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Councilors, are there any questions?
Sure.
Councilor Abdu.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, sir, for your presentation this evening. How do policymakers like the 9 around this table get a hold of the 5-year plan? I just learned of this evening.
Oh, just ask me, I'll send it to you.
Will you please send it to the 9 of us?
Yes.
That'd be great. I would encourage you to use us as a resource, as we often some of our experience is anecdotal, but some of us are involved with that population, and there are questions. So I would appreciate the plan and look forward to sitting down with you in the future.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilor LaPlante?
So, a lot of data. I'd like to dig into the data just a little bit more. We talked about 100 chronically homeless folks, and it could rise between 50 and 30. Talked about sheltered, 600. What struck me as amazingly shocking was Lawrence Public School had 250 homeless students. And then you had the graph that said that most of the IV users are outside of the city, but I guess almost everything else are Lawrence. Can you dig down a bit into those numbers and talk to me more about the Lawrence population? Out of that 100, or out of that 600, however you want to break it, tell me how many are from Lawrence and how many are not from Lawrence?
So it's hard to gather the exact information of who's from Lawrence, but also we have to look at how do we define being from Lawrence. Is it previous residency? Is it being born here? And how long does that residency? For Greater Lawrence Family Health Center, they're working with a lot of the families and individuals here. That's their primary care physician. So if they're going there for medical treatment, and I don't mean to the needle exchange, then chances are they live here. That would be where they'd be referred through Mass Health.
So I'm not really getting a number. How I would define it would be homeless, the last record of where you lived. If you were born in Lawrence, but you lived in Methuen for the last 4 years, you're now a Methuen person. If you're from Andover and you moved to Lawrence and then got homeless, you're a Lawrence person. It's the last, I would consider the last place of where you actually had a place to live. That's where I would consider that. But even more important than what my definition is, I still want to figure out as best we can, and I'm not getting a number because we can't get the number. Is that my understanding? But you're able to make some sort of general statement. You said most weren't from here, so you must have some sort of number. Most is 50% plus one, right? So you have been able to tabulate at some level some number. So I'm going to ask you one more, dig a little bit more, and with all the courtesies. What are the numbers that you're finding?
So if I had to say out of those 600 that we say are homeless through Greater Lawrence Family Health Center, I'd say more than 90%. I'd say another 10% is probably coming from outside because of referrals through DTA, as well as people coming in from Puerto Rico due to the hurricane.
And when you say that 600, we're talking about sheltered individuals, right? We're not talking people in tents alongside the railroad tracks or in the parks. That's out of the 600 that are actually in a habitable domicile. Am I correct? Or you were just mentioning they may have been inside so that's not true, because you mentioned earlier they may have been inside an old building or someplace else they're able to find, so. But they've got a roof, apparently. Something over their head is now called sheltered, right? Sheltered?
Yes. So for sheltered, I'd say 600. For unsheltered, I would say that would be about 130, looking at what we've been seeing through the past couple months, yes.
I'm all over the map, and my apologies for that. One of the things, how do we measure success, to me, is how many people are no longer homeless. And it seems like, and thank you for the presentation, because you essentially gave us a blueprint of not only all the stuff that you've done, but the various methodology by which you are working day to day to deal with this issue. The ultimate answer is, did the number go down? Are we reducing the number? Initially, you said it was 101 homeless and down to 45. And so now, you see, we're mixing the verbiage. Then we talked about 100 and then 600 and then 250 homeless students. Where does the 250? Is that part of the 600 shelter? I mean, so we have to, I think, define how we're discussing this topic, because I think, in my mind, I'm all over the map now because you've gave several labels.
Yeah, so a lot of those that are in Lawrence Public School are included in that sheltered aspect.
Are saying what, through you?
Those that are homeless students are included in the sheltered homeless but some are located outside, and through the McKinney-Vento Act, they're able to get transportation from shelters in Haverhill or Lowell to get to school.
So ultimately, the question of how successful we are is, are our numbers going down? Did you have a benchmark on when you first came, what those numbers are across the board, whether it was either unsheltered or sheltered homeless, and where we are right now?
So that is the point in time count. The year before, it was 45 that we had recorded. Last year, when I led the initiative, at my previous job, we brought in 101. So the method of change was changing, but also we did see an increase in those that are on the street, and that is due in part due to the opioid epidemic. In terms of our general homelessness, if it's going down, no, it's going up. That's due in large part because of rental prices within the city. And also, to be honest, as a city, we have not put in place a concerted, coordinated effort as other cities have. That's why you see Haverhill taking a lot of our people over there, and Lowell as well. It's to the point where Greater Lawrence Family Health Center goes to Haverhill to see our population because they're not housed in Lawrence anymore.
So, and the other thing that I've learned from your presentation, through you, Mr. President, who's no longer here, is you are looking at a lot of different things. You're not just looking at homeless. You talked about needle exchange. You're talking about bringing health care. You're talking about bringing all the other things. So our focus, and I'm sure there's very good reasons why you're looking at this holistic approach, right? Rather than just dealing with homelessness, we're just going to find a place for you to live. You know, we're not just finding a place to live. We're going to make sure your health care is taken care of, or if you got any kind of detox programs we can get you into, we can get you needles or exchange programs. If we're going to be able to, the food thing, we got ourselves taken care of apparently, so that's fine. But almost everything else, we're going to do whatever we can. And it seems like you're expanding the portfolio beyond just homelessness, and now you're dealing with homelessness and their needs as opposed to homelessness, finding them a place to live. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about why rather than being focused on one special thing, you're kind of going out in a broad spectrum.
So a large part of that is due to the fact that, one, this is like by the Mayor's Health Task Force. So I'm looking at health disparities as well. And statistically, when we look at it, it's better to get somebody into housing and help them maintain that than let them fall out of homelessness and try to go through the system again. In the end, it's a lot more cost efficient to prevent homelessness than it is to house a person that is homeless. So, you know, looking at the holistic approach also deters a lot of our like a lot of expenses that we have, as well as it really does improve our public safety, such as having people that are mentally ill, schizophrenic, indoors, not in playgrounds. In addition to that, looking at what are their long-term ailments. If a person has cancer and they're on the street and they're undergoing chemo, you know, you reprioritize things. And even though I'm not in case management, when it is a situation like that, I will handle it personally, but we do have situations where we have our constituents on the streets living in cars while undergoing severe medical ailments.
I can't speak for anybody else but myself. My sense is, for everybody, a very frustrating issue, because I think we are, as a population, as leaders, very concerned and empathetic toward the problem and compassionate. We want to make sure folks are not doing that. None of us, if we put ourselves in their position, would want to be in that position. Totally get that. And it's just frustrating because I don't necessarily think we're ever going to, I hate, the good book actually says the homeless will always be among us. We're never going to take care of the homelessness completely. It's like the marker continues to be moved, and we're never going to get there. But we can continue to do more and more and more. And the question is how do we achieve success on this? And do we, I just don't know how we get to that point. And it's befuddled people who sat in this chair 40 years ago, 80 years ago, and I think back in the day there was probably more family-related organizations, or family took people in, as opposed to now we've got a lot more nonprofit kind of agencies doing stuff, and things transitioned over a little bit. But I don't want to rant, other people want to speak, so
To
one
answer
last
the
comment before I let you
yeah,
go.
to answer the question to ending homelessness, that's always been the question. How do we end homeless? You can't end homelessness. As long as there's humanity, there will be homelessness. We can decrease homelessness. That's what the 5-year plan is. And how do we do that? We could talk about that when it comes to the ESG, because that is one of the major parts to this. When we look at individuals, that's the key to stabilizing people from our city, in our city.
My last point is, if you could make us regularly update on what's going on, whether it's through the 5-year report, or maybe an annual report of some sort, something that we know are our benchmarks. Are we improving? Are we slipping? What's going on with this? What's happening with it? That would be
Sure.
helpful.
In fact, I invite all of you to come to my Homelessness Initiatives Working Group this Thursday at 3 in the library in the Robert Frost Room on the 3rd floor. I'll be there with several agencies, and we could give you the rundown of what's been going on in the homeless world.
Thank you.
Yep.
There is any other questions from councilors? Councilor Payano?
Thank you. Before my questions, I just want to talk about Councilor Plant's point. I think you brought up, some really great points. I think when we're talking about sort of like why the holistic approach, from my understanding, if you were to sort of, simplify sort of this homelessness issue, you have on one end individuals that are suffering mental illness, abusing drugs, whatever may be the cause. And then the other end, you have individuals that might go through some emergency situation, like their house got burned down. But in between, there's so many different reasons why someone might be homeless. Like, so for example, Lazarus House does a really great job in helping individuals relearn certain skill sets, not just skill sets, obtaining a job, but also how to budget. And it's a very sort of small percentage of the population, and it's not necessarily so clear and cut. So I think that's why I think the holistic approach is very important. Now, there was my two questions are around, sort of this question about success and benchmarks. I want to hear how you measure success, and also I'm interested in knowing sort of like how we came up with the numbers that were presented on the PowerPoint. You said, I think 600. But then you also said that there's 250 students at LPS that are currently homeless. So about a third of the homeless are students. And that just seems, I would have, if you told me it's 250, I would think that they'd be a smaller percentage of the number of homelessness. So I would think it's an even larger number.
So yeah, to backtrack a little bit, for our students, that's just the students in Lawrence Public Schools. Like, the VOC has a totally different set of homeless students, so that number is even higher.
So where do we come with the 600 number? Is that more anecdotal?
600, that came from Greater Lawrence Family Health Center. I talked to their development partner and who they gathers their data.
So it's not that there's 600 homeless individuals, it's just 600 with Greater Lawrence Family Health Center.
Yes, but those also coincide with other numbers that correlate to the process in which people navigate once they're homeless. So one would be Mass Health. So getting people connected to Mass Health, that's how we know that they're going to Greater Lawrence Family Health Center. That's where they enroll. So that also coincides with the number that Lawrence Public Schools has.
Okay, I think I got that one. How many? You mentioned that we're currently at full capacity at the shelters. How many shelters do we have, and what is full capacity?
So right now, the shelter that we all know the most is Daybreak Shelter. They could hold about 50. Yeah, and they're at capacity. They've been at capacity for a while. I talked to their executive director today. 50% of those that are in that shelter are from Lawrence. In addition to that, we also have family shelters. We have Casa Nueva Vida. They require a referral from DTA. So a lot of the people that are in Casa Nueva Vida have been referred to them by that state agency. So they're not necessarily from Lawrence. Wherever there's a vacancy, DTA will fill the most immediate family with that vacancy. So we have people there from Brockton, Woburn, various places. And then in addition to that, we also have Lazarus House's family shelter, and they have a capacity of about 30, and that's mostly just for families and if they have men, individual men, that are clean and sober. But the only one that will allow people to come in with drugs within their system is Daybreak.
So we only have sort of one emergency shelter, and that's Daybreak?
Well, now that they're under BSAS, honestly, we don't have an emergency shelter. Yeah.
I have a question.
Councilor de la Cruz?
Yes, thank you. We understand that Mr. LaPlante was talking about how we're going to measure the homelessness is going down if we don't have provided a house, a job, or a better life for them, for every individual. I understand that we have no apartments in this city. I understand there is no job in this city, but at the same time, how can you measure that everything is working better for the homeless people if we don't have a count of how many people have changed their life from being a homeless and the life being totally different in about 6 months?
So for that, you would have to look at the agencies within the city. So you'd have to look at how does Lazarus House move out people, where do they go on to? Daybreak keeps track of who they help and where they've gone to. They do that with their halfway houses as well. So, you'd have to go to each individual agency and say how many people are successfully placed, but also how do you define success for that individual? With HUD, we have to be very cautious of people's disabilities and whatever circumstances they may be facing. So a person may still have a drinking problem once they're in a shelter, but that is still progress. They're off the street and they're not doing anything dangerous to those around them. So it depends on, the individual. What is their mental state? What is their health ailments? Things of that nature.
One more question is, taking the homeless out of the bridge, it hasn't solved the problems because they moved to the park, to the common park. And if you pass by at 3 o'clock and you see girls walking around, you can see men following these young people in the park. I have stopped many times. And, I say, I have my cell phone. I can call the police if you don't go away. Then what's working between the police department and the organization that are dealing with the homeless that are not at the bridge, one place where they could find the homeless. Now they are all over the city, especially at the park. After 3 o'clock, I don't recommend anybody to walk around there.
So to be fair, there were homeless people in those areas before we did shut down the Casey encampment. The police did get reports of people being there. This is nothing new. I think people just really avert their attention to that because there is the lack of the encampment. And we did have to shut down the bridge, even though it was one place where everybody was, because it was one of the largest drug hubs in New England.
I think it's more dangerous to see them following girls at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, right in the middle of the day, especially. I seen it in the park.
To that, those same individuals are right by a preschool before that. We're still going to find that in whatever location we have people. But wherever we do find an emerging presence of people popping up to that extent, the police and I do handle it. You'll see the numbers in the commons during the daytime when kids are there has really decreased. Before, must have been September, I did a count. I had 11 people that were homeless in the commons. I counted at the end of December, I had 0. They were in the library or they were in other places accessing services. And in addition to that, we had the rail trail pop up with several encampments, but I found that those were tucked between 2 charter schools. So we shut those down as well. There's no encampments on the rail trail anymore.
I hope to see that there is one of those buildings that we have in the community that is being taken as shelter. For example, one of the buildings that is on Orchard Street, it has been there, it's closed, it's not being used, you know, and instead of having those people on the street walking around.
Can I just add clarification points? Is that okay? All right. So, because this is such a complex issue, like Councilor Payano mentioned, this is why it's taking a long time, and it's going to take a long time. This issue didn't just pop up, and now we're dealing with it. You mentioned it, Councilor LaPlante. But the first few months that Anil has been on board, it's really conducting assessment to understand what is the severity of the problem, what are the root causes that we're dealing with so that we can come up with a plan that it's multi-pronged. Why? Because it's not going to be just finding housing. It's not just going to be case management. It's not just going to be finding jobs. It is way more complex than that. And then we need to have all of these pieces moving and this relationship and partnership with the different city departments to deal with it. That means we have to work with DPW. We have to work with the police department. We have to work with the fire chief. During those smaller meetings that we have with the mayor, they happen, you know, monthly, depends on what's going on. That's what we're measuring, what's happening across the city. We're taking a pulse. We're looking at what are the trends, where are they popping up, what do we need to do, who do we need to call. There are a lot of issues that are systemic, that are very difficult to tackle. And so it's not just simply saying, you know, we're here, we're educating you today on how deep this problem is, but we're hoping to do this across the board ongoingly. This is not going to stop at once. I know that we brought up the ESG, that's going to come up later. That's just one tool. Let me tell you one thing that we can say right now that has changed. When we started dealing with this problem, I know that Mayor Rivera brought up a couple of meetings about the task force just for the homeless under the bridge. And I was still at the task force, and it was very evident to me that this issue, there's a lot of services, but they were not coordinated. Mm-hmm. You have the people that are working, that are HUD funded, that work together, that's the continuum of care, that's great, but it's functioning within one mechanism. Now, since Neely started, we have about 46 organizations that were not talking to one another. So there's one advancement, there's one progress. Now we have people from multiple sectors talking to one another, understanding. And how does that facilitate the process? Easy. Instead of saying, you know, you need to go to DTA, you go to so-and-so in DTA. You have these warm referrals that are happening. You're establishing relationships. People are learning how each individual organization works. That's important. If you don't have that foundation and that infrastructure, you cannot tackle an issue. So that's the other piece. Money and housing, yeah, all those things are important, but we need to look at everything, because if we're having this issue with people who are homeless and we have the syringe issue, which wasn't in the radar, but it came up because it came up as a trend. We know that the work that the task force does, the work that City Council, DPW, it's coming up. We work with DPW, we secure some puncture-resistant gloves. That was the other thing that we did. So these are the things, we have our plan, and it looks beautiful, and it's a process. But in the meantime, we're also tackling the things that are coming up and making sure that we're building relationship and strengthening these partnerships so that we can actually address this. How do we know that we're making progress? The point-in-time count every year. In January, we hope to see that that's going to decline. Now, the opioid epidemic, it's not Lawrence-based. This is a national epidemic. This is a major issue. Hospitals don't know what to do. This is why Lawrence General gave this money. Their emergency rooms are packed with people. They don't know what to do with this extreme weather that we're facing. What do? Continue to work on a plan, or really go and pull up our sleeves and deal with what we need to do that night so that we don't have people dying in our city? So this is a complex issue. We hope that we can continue. We'll share the 5-year plan with you. Good luck reading that logic model, because it's quite intense, but at least you have a report. Whenever you need us to come back, we more than welcome the opportunity, but also integrate yourselves if you have the opportunity. Go to some of the meetings, have conversations with us individually so that you can understand this is a monster that we're tackling right now. And it is a regional effort, because the other piece that he didn't mention is that we belong to so many coalitions. Right now, to the continuum of care, it's out of our continuum of care. We belong to a balance of state, which is statewide, but we work closely with CTI and Lowell, which is our really a continuum of care partner. They're the ones disseminating funds to us, to different organizations. So we are at that table, we are at the state table, we are at the local table, we are at the homeless initiatives table, we are everywhere we need to be so that we can have everyone's voices and everyone's input as we move forward. So I hope that you understand that, at least I leave with that today. Thank you.
Councilor Levy.
Thank you, Council President. I know that this is a big issue that we are facing right now in the city of Lawrence. But also, have you looked into the other community around to see how are they dealing with the same problem of the homeless? Because you say at the end of your presentation, you say that most of these people homeless all belong to Lawrence. Do you have any database that say this is the amount, this is, from Lawrence, they living here, or how do you determine that these people are just only from Lawrence?
So with that, I look at cities like Lowell and Haverhill, I see what they do. They do a concerted effort. They are under ESG funding as well. And through that, they really help to circle out people out of the shelter system. So what that is, they're taking in people, they're working with them, and then providing them with the resources and tools to get them housed. Here, we don't have that kind of effort going on. And in addition to that, a lot of the reason why their unsheltered population is so low is because they shelter them. We don't shelter them. So that's why we're seeing more and more people on the street. And that's why it seems that, the number is going up. But they are like really being proactive about their situations. You see the way that they do it. They really put the concerted effort with the nonprofits in a certain part of the city. And when they put that direct effort there, they really direct a lot of their resources. So they see an economic boom from it.
Yeah, like Councilor De La Cruz said, it's very hard after 3 or 4 o'clock just to pass by through the park. But not just only that. It's very hard and difficult sometimes just to walk through Essex Street. They keep stopping you, asking you for money, asking you for so many other things, I have a building in here in Lawrence that I'm the manager, and sometimes I have to remove them from the 6th floor because they go and sleep over there. So right now, I had somebody also sleeping that I found in another building in Broadway Street on one of the property. And they are there forever. They don't want to move from there. But I don't see any solution with all the resources that we have right now. I don't see that it's coming down. It's getting growth of this problem here in the city of Lawrence.
So you'll see in Lowell and Haverhill, they don't have the same issue to this degree of people just in your face asking for money and also just being out in the open to this extent. But that's because they both have drop-in centers. We don't. We have McDonald's, and that's where they're going to beg for money. That's where they're going to linger. That's where things are going to happen. But if you have a drop-in center, then it's a controlled environment that's monitored, and people have a place to go.
Councilors, are there any further questions?
Sure.
Councilor Rodriguez?
So, how you doing? Through you, Council President. Do we have a current plan to reduce homelessness in Lawrence?
Yes, that is the 5-year plan to reduce homelessness.
Okay, what do you consider the 5 most important points to reduce homelessness?
A lot of that would be talking to different policymakers to put things in place at a state level. That's one, because a lot of these things that we are suffering through come from a state level. These are policies that keep people in place. These are the barriers that we talk about.
Perhaps, can you mention some of them?
So, for example, one thing is the syringe law, for example. Anybody could hand out syringes. That's a state law. And local authorities have no say in the issue. That's been in place for years now. So anybody can come here and just hand out syringes to intravenous users and say that's a service, and that's totally legal without checking their credentials or taking the needles back for that matter. So that's a state law. So talking to policymakers about that. Another thing is trying to increase partnerships with different cities. How do we share our resources? How do we communicate? it wasn't until recently we realized how much Lowell was taking care of our residents. In the past 2 years, they spent more than $1 million in our constituents. In addition,
Do we have partnership with Andover, North Andover, and Methuen, perhaps?
they don't have a strong nonprofit sector. A lot of times people say, why don't we have shelters there? But they don't have a large homeless population because they don't have a nonprofit sector, and there aren't any resources that are conducive to a person that is homeless. They don't have any food pantries. They don't have the supports that surround what happens when there is a shelter,
So you're
such
saying
as
that-
health clinics and so forth.
How many of the homeless population right now are from those three communities, perhaps?
Within Lawrence or from those different communities?
Yes.
It's mostly the intravenous users, so I'm going to say less than 10%.
Less than 10%. So because of the fact that we have a system in place of food pantry and needle exchange and methadone clinic, you're saying that we increasing homeless population because of that? That's what you're saying, right?
I'm saying that the supports that we put in place for our own constituents are very attractive to those that are in need of food, clothing, basic living essentials.
So you were mentioning 5 very important points to reduce homelessness. Do we have any, in the plan, do we have any other points that are important to reduce homelessness in Lawrence?
Yes, that would be identifying different grants and income streams that could help us, one, prevent homelessness, such as rental assistance for those that are in danger of losing their accommodations, as well as other things for prison reentry. So one of the systems that we find and one of the major barriers is people find themselves incarcerated and discharged to the streets just to repeat the same offenses. There isn't any place for them to go, so we see that as something that is secular.
So now you mentioned grants. Do we have a system to manage grants from the city of Lawrence, from the administration perspective? I mean,
From the what perspective?
from the administration perspective, do we have a system currently, or do we have to depend on someone else, a third party?
Oh, that is us, the Office of Planning and Community Development. Within our office, we're also part of the Balance of State Continuum of Care in Boston. So that's how we keep track of all the funding that goes through the state and how it's distributed.
You know that every time that we mention grants, we have to have an accountability type of system to know how much money we receiving given to someone and the result behind that. Do we have that in place?
We could, yes, if we take on the ESG funds, yes, we do have a system for keeping that in place, and that's with the agency that responds to the RFR. And they would be the ones that preside, that look over the match of those funds and the distribution, and that all coincides with the Balance of State Continuum of Care and how the outlines have been defined by HUD.
So we could have an accountability plan, but we don't have currently. Because we have grants that are dedicated to homelessness. But if we currently have grants, why don't we have that system in place to know the result of that money?
This is a system that is statewide. This is through the Balance of State Continuum of Care in Boston. So that is part of Department of Housing and Community Development. So it's a shared system amongst various agencies and cities.
All right, so we're talking about grants to prevent homelessness or to aid the homeless.
Well, I don't want to go to there if we don't have that item in the
No,
table.
if that's, I'm asking for as a point of clarification. If it's to address the homeless, like to assist homeless, the one grant we have that it's on the table is the ESG grant. Anything we receive, the other funds we have through HUD are to do housing, rehab, first-time home buyers. I mean, it's different. This is a different grant all on its own. We have to follow standards, and HUD establishes the standards for us to follow. What are they expecting for that grantee to do, and what we need to do to make sure that we are accountable to the state for this money, to the federal government, and also benchmarks, outcomes. There are things that are listed that we need to follow. So it's not just, receiving the grant now. The monies are going to go primarily to assist for rapid rehousing. That's the one grant that we have for this particular purpose. The other grant that we have, it's really to support Neely's position, which is the Lawrence General Hospital, and that's the grant that has allowed also for a lot of that other grant and all the work and strategic plan. That has deliverables every 3-6 months. We have to provide a report of all the DON funds that we receive, and actually, we have someone from the Lawrence General Hospital who sits within the executive committee of the Mayor's Health Task Force, who we need to report on budgets, we need to provide updates on what is happening in every single category and all community health initiatives. So those are the 2 grants that we have right now.
So only 2
for
grants
that, for this particular purpose, yes.
To reduce homelessness in Lawrence, or perhaps in the region.
To reduce homelessness in Lawrence. Okay, let's just be clear. Now, we're part of a regional effort because you cannot do this work alone. But the grant, the monies that we receive are just to help reduce homelessness in Lawrence. And that's the chronically homeless, and those are individuals in encampments. I mean, this is a very specific grant. All right?
Councilor, I would like to point out that we do have a document. We have a document that is tabled. If you have any further questions?
I want to wait for that.
Are there any further questions?
Sure. I have another question. In the last 6 months, how many people we have provide, or just an estimate, how many people we have provided with letters saying that they're homeless?
We as the city or our agencies?
Can you clarify that?
How many letters have we written of homelessness?
Yes, an estimate perhaps.
So that goes to the agencies. That would be Elliott Services.
So it's not the city of Lawrence?
No, I mean, if it is an instance in which I witness it, I can do a letter, but I've done less than 10 of those.
No, I just wanted to clarify that. All right, no more questions, thank you.
Councilor Payano.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to clarify, so when we're talking about an accountability plan, so we're saying that monies that are coming through grants, there is an accountability plan for those. That's what I'm hearing. Okay.
Yes.
And this would be whatever money that you were just talking about would go to that as well. Because I think what was concerning is that you said we could, and I think at least my eyebrows were like, what does that mean? So it sounds like we do. I want to go back to one of the questions I had earlier. So there was you mentioned that we have certain shelters in Lawrence, and you talked about full capacity. So just in general, how many shelters do we have, however people define them to be?
Three.
3. Okay, so full capacity to you, how many people would that be?
It depends on each location.
Okay. Right, no, I'm saying like if you add it all together, like anecdotally, right? So I'm not asking for exact numbers. Like how many beds are there? How many rooms are there? Because I think it's important when you say full capacity that people understand.
When we
what
talk
that means.
about the Lazarus House and Daybreak, I'd say about 80 beds.
Okay. And I think, and maybe this would be the subject of a future grant, I don't know. It sounds like there is a lot of information that we currently don't have. And even though there's communications between all these different entities, I don't know exactly how that data is being shared and being compiled together. That way you could have, and everyone else that's interested in this issue could have a better understanding of what exactly we're talking about. Because if we say 600 that are getting food stamps and basically applying for DTA assistance, there's probably other folks that are couch surfing, whatever that might be. So, I wonder if there's a way to sort of get all that together. Lastly, you talked about, I think Councilor Plant talked about measuring success. How do you measure success?
For me, when I look at on an individual basis, it depends. I look at how much is their situation improved over the past year. That's from their physical well-being, their mental well-being, to where they're residing, to what resources they're accessing.
Okay. So you're not necessarily looking at the bigger picture, you're just looking at how many individuals we can help throughout the process?
Yes, in order to get stabilized. Part of that stabilization is finding some sort of accommodation for them, whether it be transitional housing, halfway house, or something permanent.
My last question is, through your slide, you mentioned that less than 10% individuals are using. Through your slide, you mentioned that less than 10% are using sort of like services in the city. Is that correct?
Wait, what was that statistic? Less than 10% are?
Yeah, because you kept saying, or maybe throughout your discussion, you said less than 10%, and I'm confusing with something else. But you were saying that a majority of the people being serviced are from Lawrence.
Yes.
Okay. So when you say majority, is it just like do you mean like 90% of the people being serviced are from Lawrence?
I would say 75%.
Okay. And then as far as the shelters that you mentioned, the maybe 80 seats, you're saying like maybe half of them are Lawrence people?
Half of the ones at Daybreak right now are. I couldn't tell you what it is at Casa Nueva Vida, which I didn't include in those 83 beds because that's separate. They take DTA referrals. But with Lazarus House, it depends on the availability they had. It's a constantly shifting population.
Okay, thank you.
Something quick,
Any other councilors?
something for clerk.
Councilor Rodriguez.
Sure. So you keep on mentioning Lowell. You refer to, when you refer to Lowell, you're referring to the Lower Transition Living Center?
That's one of the places, yes.
So they have two facilities, one, the wet shelter and the dry shelter, right?
They have a couple facilities, but the one that takes the population that we talk about, chronic homeless that are on the streets, that would be Lowell Transitional, yes.
And they're serving the Lawrence community, you said?
Yeah, we do have a good amount over there.
Okay, because I called.
Okay.
And they told me that only Merrimack County are accepted.
Merrimack Valley, yeah.
No. From the Merrimack, no, hold on one second.
Middlesex County.
Middlesex County. So that doesn't include Lawrence.
I'm talking about their protocol shelter, and that's also just one shelter. Their protocol shelter will take anybody. That's when it's below 32 degrees. That's something they do seasonally. So yes, a lot of times if the police can't find a placement for a person here and they want to go in, it's a matter of how do we get them to Lowell.
Haverhill, you're talking about Emmaus shelter, right?
They're talking about what?
Emmaus shelter?
Oh, Emmaus House, yes.
Yes.
And under them, they have Mitch's Place, yes.
They have 30 beds, they told me.
In Mitch's Place, yes.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify those 3 points, and it's funny how there is people from Lawrence going to other communities, and we are taking people in the shelters in Lawrence from anywhere else.
Yeah, well, with Daybreak, that is a state agency. There is no requirement for you to be from Lawrence as long as you're from the state.
All right, no more questions.
That's a point of clarification, I guess.
Sure.
So every single person, individual or family who seeks shelter gets entered into a system that it's part of the entire, state. It's a federal, a database that we use. So this is why you know who's being served to where. So for instance, someone came in and accessed services through Daybreak. And Daybreak makes a referral because they don't have any, say Daybreak because that's the most common one, but they don't have space. There is a process. Everyone that seeks services needs to be entered. They need to collect demographics. That goes into a database. That database then, that's what we track, all right? So we were able to get some information. So you remember that Nilly talked about there's over $1 million that have been spent on our constituents? That's how we know that. So between fiscal year 13 through fiscal year 17, there was a total of 6,607 people seeking homeless prevention services. They are all from the 01840 through 01843. That means they collect information, they know where people are coming from. The same way, if they come in and there's no space in Daybreak, within the system, you look to see where's their space. And so it happens that other communities that have more shelter space, that's where we're going to end up sending people, correct? Because there's no space here, so.
So that's through DTA or that's through
No,
the
this is
shelter?
through the HUD. HUD has a system called HMIS. That is a database that everyone, including people who are going to be applying or using the ESG, their organization, they need to use this system as well to track where they're coming from, where they're going, and all those other benchmarks that you were talking about. That's part of the process. So I hope that clarifies. So we know for a fact that out of that 6,607, people that were rehoused using ESG monies and other sorts of monies, RAFT, there's 406 were from Lawrence. So other communities are also receiving our homeless and case management and placement. It's happening somewhere else for our constituents.
Okay.
Councilors, any further questions or comments? Seeing there's none, councilors,
Motion to
this
withdraw.
particular item does not require any action by the city council. Is there a motion to withdraw?
Motion to withdraw.
Motion has been made and properly second in discussion. Seeing there's none, all those in favor to withdraw, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next document is document 1618, resolution, Melanie Resto, Superintendent of Sicily, the American Cemetery. Councilor LaPlante.
Sure, Council President, I would, as this is our custom, I would recommend that be sent down to the ordinance committee.
It's going down
I would
to-
also make a, the title should be Sicily Rome American Cemetery. From this point forward, I hope that every document includes that, because that's the proper name for the cemetery.
Thank you. This is going down to the ordinance committee.
Thank you.
Document 1218, appropriation transfer from retained earnings to special project fund for the procurement of equipment and projects in the amount of $3,270,000. Placed on the agenda by Brian Peña, our Water and Sewer Commissioner, is going to the Budget and Finance Committee. Document 1018, Office of the City Attorney, prior fiscal year's unpaid bills, on the amount of $1,200 is going down to the Budget and Finance Committee. Document 1318, petition for approval of expenditures pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44, Section 31, request to consider as an emergency measure placed on the agenda by Carlos Jaques, the DPW Director. Councilors, is there a motion to consider this document as an emergency?
So
To
moved.
suspend Rule 11
Second.
and consider as an emergency? Motion has been
Motion
made.
to suspend the rule.
And I
take it
second
as
the
an
motion.
emergency.
Motion has been made and properly second. Any discussion? I'll call for discussion. Good evening, Director Jaques.
Good evening, Council President, members of the City Council. Carlos Jaques, Director of Public Works. I want to clarify what the intention of this measure is. As you probably all are aware, the City of Lawrence and the region experienced record-breaking cold temperatures during the last week of 2 weeks of December and first week of January. This deep cold snap that we experienced wreaked havoc on some of our building and particularly heating components throughout the city, which the department, through our Building and Facilities Division, was forced to address. It caused some serious damages to certain locations of the San Lawrence East Elementary School and other various city buildings. Some of those damages have been remediated as we stand right now, but some of them have not, considering that we did not obviously budget for these type of events. And we are requesting that the event be considered as an emergency measure, so it would allow my budget to be able to overspend its budget, so we can address some of these heating concerns that were developed throughout this cold snap.
Do you have an amount? Do you have an actual amount?
We do not at this point. Right now, we have some totals from some minor issues that were addressed through some city buildings. The major Part of this measure is, again, the South Lawrence City Schools, is we have a burst pipe out there that flooded some of the outside parking lot of the school. We do not have current estimates for that. We do estimate it's going to be above $50,000 just to remediate that item alone. There are other items that were paid out of the regular operating budget that were above and beyond the capacity that we have, considering that we're halfway through the winter time right now. So the expectation is that if this does get approved by City Council today, we'll be able to offset those funds into a separate project account so we can continue with the operating budget through the rest of the year.
Okay. Councilors, have any questions or comments?
Sure.
Councilor De La Cruz, Councilor Rodriguez.
Will part of the money go for the temporarily workers that we need to remove the snow?
I'm sorry?
If some of that expensive, some of that money is going to go to continue hiring temporary workers.
No. On the Chapter 44, Section 31, this money can only be used to alleviate the emergency action for which this is taken. In this case, this is specifically for heating components related to the buildings. So this would not be going to pay for wages or overtime for temporary workers or permanent workers.
Councilor Rodriguez.
Sure. How you doing?
Good evening, Councilor.
So you don't have an amount, but how are we going to do this? I mean, do you want a blank check?
The way this we ask for the City Council at this point is an emergency declaration to be able to consider this event. At this point, Finance Director Ionella will submit a letter to the Bureau of Accounts at the Division of Local Services to request the actual approval to spend the funds. At that point in time, a more formal budget will be developed for them. They will give us a not-to-exceed amount of how much we can spend on this particular event. For example, when I came before the City Council last year for the October Storm event, we set up with that cap amount of $300,000. I'm not saying that this is what's going to be for this particular event. What I'm saying is that we haven't set that amount yet, and that amount is set when we get the actual approval for expenditures from the Division of Local Services. So right now, all we ask for City Council is just a declaration of an emergency measure, so we can go ahead and submit that account letter to the Division of Local Services.
And then you're going to have an amount, and then you're going to have that amount approved?
Yes.
All right, no more question.
Okay. Councilor LaPlante?
Very briefly, so once we get to that amount, I understand what we're trying to do here tonight, but once we get to that next step, I would hope that we would consider using the Green Communities monies, of which we received a $500,000 grant within the last 3 weeks, and this is something that we could put it toward, which is boilers in our school systems and other municipal buildings, so that might be a good place to plug that money. I just throw that out there as something that I could support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor.
Councilor Payano?
I'm just trying to understand the process. So, so if this is passed, you then go on to the state?
So, under the general, Massachusetts General Law, budget and rules, when the budget is appropriated a certain line item, by law, we cannot exceed that appropriation. Right now, unless there is either a state of emergency declared by the governor or the City Council specifically declares an emergency for a specific situation. And it doesn't have to be limited to necessarily a man-made event or a natural-made event. So it's flexible in that regards. So what that allows the city is to or the department in this case, is to overlay a specific line item appropriation. In this case, specifically for boilers. So the vote that the City Council will undertake is to allow the department to be able to overspend its appropriation for boilers over that certain amount so we can remediate the emergency for which this is being declared.
For purpose of clarity, I am going to read out loud what Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44, Section 31 states. And it says, Section 31, no department financed by municipal revenue or in whole or in part by taxation of any city or town except Boston shall incur a liability in excess of appropriation made for the use of such department. Each item recommended by the mayor and voted by the council in cities. And then if we go down one sentence, it says, except in cases of major disasters, and including but not limited to flood, drought, fire, hurricane, earthquake, storms, or other catastrophe, which is, in this case, this is what the director is saying, that because we have a finance law that states that we cannot overspend our budget, the budget that we have already approved for him, he is coming before us to ask us to approve his overexpenditure, which will come. So he's asking us, councilors, since we had an emergency of a storm nature, as listed in the general law, I wish to overspend my budget because I had to spend what was already budgeted for myself. Councilor Payano.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess my confusion is just that there isn't an amount that is being asked.
And usually when we've done this, that has been my biggest concern. We don't have an amount. It is an unknown at this point. So what we have to do is, well, my suggestion will be that we do allow the expenditure, but he will have to come back to the city council. The likelihood is that there will be a transfer of funds, either from the general fund and or any other departments that will not utilize those funds that have been already allocated. At that point, we will have a better understanding of what the expenditures will look like. Unfortunately, I don't think that he could provide it, even if we wanted to have that. And in order to continue to provide services to the city, he will have to either stop providing the service or overspend his budget. So it's either do we stop or do we overspend? And unfortunately, there's no way around it.
And I just want to clarify, Council President, Mass General Law establishes that under this particular vote and for the item, it's only related to the specific event, in this case of the deep freeze. So it's not like it's a blank check for me to be able to spend any type of event that happens during the winter time. It's for specifically for this emission declaration for this deep freeze that we experienced in the last 2 weeks of December and the first week of January. So it is specifically for those issues and specifically related to any damages related to that event.
So it is important to know that in order for this to pass, we need 2/3 members of the city council to be in support of it tonight. Councilor Rodriguez.
Sure. Can you just mention the event that happened during those 2 weeks for the record?
Yes. Again, the city and the region as a whole experienced record-breaking cold temperatures of last I checked that were broken in the last 125 years. And it wasn't just the actual temperature gauge, but it's actually the amount of time that was spent during that event. Our buildings were not built and meant to design to withstand these amount of temperatures for that amount of time, which is what caused a lot of the breakdowns to some of the equipment that we have in the city buildings.
So that
deep freeze event, if you want to call it specific.
I just wanted to know, like, specific situations that happened during those 2 weeks that you have to that you actually going to address once we approve this. I mean, school this, that school, that building, this building, and all that information.
The biggest one, which is why I'm probably coming here for you, is again, going back to San Lawrence C School. We had an external pipe that was insulated, but it was not heated. During that day, I think the temperature gauge reached minus 12 degrees. So at that point in time, some of the pipe froze and burst and caused flooding in the area. The building had to be evacuated at that point in time because it was actually the main sprinkler line going into the building. That sprinkler line has been remediated, but it currently, and it's still insulated, but the area which was enclosed completely burst open. So by that point, we need to get a contractor to come in here, come back and insulate the property and re-enclose it so it's actually protected against the elements. Excuse me. And that's the main number that we currently do not have right now because that project will have to go out to bid.
So one main event and then minor events.
Correct.
Can you mention a couple of the minor events?
One of them, for example, we had an air handling issue here at City Hall during that time frame as well. What happened there is, just to be more specific, the boiler did not go down at that point in time. However, some of the air handler temperatures that were going into the boiler room did not have a control mechanism, which caused the boiler room itself to fall on the freezing, which caused the pipe to freeze and caused the boiler to shut down. So it wasn't a malfunction with the boiler. It was actually a pipe freeze that we had there. We had to get a contractor in here to close the air handling unit and also thaw the pipe so we could get circulation and heating through the system. So that was another type of event that we experienced in actually a couple of buildings. The Tarbuck School actually as well. We had some leaks on that water pipe as well because everything froze. So the major event with the San Lawrence School, but also some minor events that we experienced in about 5 or 6 different buildings throughout the city.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much.
Councilors, are there any questions or comments? Seeing there's none, Councilor, what's your motion? Your decision.
Second.
Okay, I'd like to call the question. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you, Councilors.
Thank you. Document 1418, supplemental order regarding the application of bond premium is going down to the Budget and Finance Committee. Committee reports, Ordinance Committee, there's none. Budget and Finance, there's none. Housing Committee, none. Personnel Committee, none. Public Safety Committee, none. Committee of the Whole, there's none. Withdrawals, there's none. Old Business. Document 6017, disposition, 370 Exit Street, to be referred to the Housing Committee. Document 6117, disposition, document 372 Exit Street, is going down to the Housing Committee. Councilors, are there any table matters that you wish to take off the table at this point? Okay, seeing there's none. Is there a motion for any document? Seeing there's none.
You guys want to talk about something?
New business, document 318, handicap parking, 6 Crafton Street, Suma Woking, is going down to the Ordinance Committee. Document 418, transfer vendor license, 34 Sargent Street, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Document 518, handicap parking, 199 Boxford Street, to be deleted, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Document 618, handicap parking, 31 Fairmont Street, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Document 718, removal of snow from awnings and sidewalks, modification of ordinance, section 1204-040, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Document 818, depositing snow on sidewalks, streets, or highway prohibited, modification of ordinance, section 1204-050, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Document 918, handicap parking, 151 West Street, Ordinance Committee. Document 1118, creation of a City Council Standing Subcommittee on Education, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Document 1718, handicap parking, 1 Highland Ave, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Document 1818, appointment, Zoning Board of Appeals, Richard Consoli, reappointment, is going to the Personnel Committee. Document 1918, appointment, Zoning Board of Appeals, Beatriz Taveras, reappointment, is going to the Personnel Committee. Document 2018, appointment, Lawrence Sanitary District, Brian Peña, is going to the Personnel Committee. Document 2118, appointment, Zoning Board of Appeals, Wilma Sola, is going to the Personnel Committee. Mr. Clerk, what is the deadline for each one of these appointments?
I'm sorry?
What is the deadline? When do we need to act by?
I consulted with the city attorney, that does not apply, the 30-day deadline does not apply to any of them.
Okay, thank you. Document 2218, Procurement Equity Ordinance, by Mayor Rivera and myself, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Document 2318, Construction Equity Ordinance, by Mayor Rivera and myself, is going to the Ordinance Committee. Councilors, I am now going to appoint each one of you to the subcommittees which you will be working on for this term. Okay, Budget and Finance Committee, Councilor Mark LaPlante, Councilor Dave Abdu, Councilor Pavel Payano, and Councilor Brian De Peña. Ordinance and Intergovernmental Committee, Councilor Stella Reyes, Councilor Giovanni Rodriguez, Councilor Maria de la Cruz, and Councilor Ana Levy. Housing Committee, Councilor Giovanni Rodriguez, Councilor Mark LaPlante, Councilor Ana Levy, Councilor Pavel Payano. Personnel Committee, Councilor Dave Abdu, Councilor myself, Kendris Vasquez, Councilor Maria de la Cruz, Councilor Brian De Peña. Public Safety Committee, Councilor Mark LaPlante, Councilor Giovanni Rodriguez, Councilor Pavel Payano, Councilor Maria de la Cruz. Committee on the Whole, Councilor Giovanni Rodriguez, and all of the city councilors serve on that committee. For Councilors, please note that the organizational meeting for your subcommittee assignments will happen on the first night of your meeting. You will be electing a chair and a vice chair among your colleagues. The Budget and Finance Committee will be meeting next Wednesday, January 24th. Ordinance will be meeting Thursday, January 25th. Housing usually meets on Mondays, January 22nd, Monday. Personnel, Tuesday, January 23rd. Public safety. And no, we could do Monday, January 22nd. It will be a relatively quick meeting for organizational purposes.
Public safety.
Yes. Committee of the Whole, there's no need to meet yet. Councilors, have any questions?
I have a question, Councilman.
Councilor De La Cruz?
Yes, President, is there a way to move the safety committee for another, for Thursdays?
It's challenging because those committees are very intense in the number in the amount of work that they do. So it will be extremely challenging to move public safety for Thursdays. The ordinance committee will last at least 3 hours. It's a very long meeting. So it's very difficult to move it right now.
Yeah.
Ordinance will be at least 3 hours.
Yes.
Then is no way it can be changed to another day?
Not
of the
right
week?
now.
No.
Nope.
It will be very challenging to do it. Councilors,
Just a quick
Councilor
question,
LaPlante?
Council President. What day was the Public Safety Committee meeting? Did you schedule one?
January 22nd?
Same day as the housing?
Same day as housing. We'll schedule one 30 minutes before the other.
At what time?
So Teresa will let us know. It will be 7. Most of our meetings are usually scheduled at 7 p.m. Because there's 2 meetings that will happen on the same night. One will be at 7 and another one at 7:30. Public safety we could do at 7. Yeah, that would be much faster. Yep.
Council President, to you.
Councilor Payano had a question. Councilor Rodriguez.
I'll ask my question afterwards.
Okay, Councilor Rodriguez.
The Planning Committee, they are here, Susan Fain and the Homeless Coordinator. They're here to talk about item 38817 as well. So I would like to make a motion to take that item out of the table matters.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and properly second. Any discussion? Seeing there is none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Council Vice President Rodriguez.
Yes.
Councilor Pena, noted. Councilor De La Cruz.
What I'm supposed to answer?
This is a motion to
yes or
take
no?
off the table, yes or no?
Yes.
Or other?
Yes.
Council Payano.
Yes.
Council Abdu.
Yes.
Council LaPlante.
No.
Council Levy.
Yes.
Council Reyes.
Yes.
And Council President Vasquez.
Yes, motion carries.
7.
Councilor Rodriguez.
I just wanted to give the opportunity to Susan Fain and the Homeless Coordinator to talk about the items if they want.
due respect to the council, Eileen Burnell from the Office of the Mayor. I was here on December 19th. We sat through the entire meeting, and I watched the community development staff sit here extremely respectfully with a tabled item that they thought was being taken off the table that was never voted on. The same thing just happened again this evening. And that's fine. With all due respect, you have the right to keep things on the table for as long as you so choose, and I respect that decision, and if the body chooses not to move on this item tonight, that's your prerogative. But when you see 4 rows of people sitting here, if you could just let them know that at 7 o'clock instead of at 10:15, it's really appreciated. The people get here at work at 8 in the morning. They haven't gone home for supper, and they've been here now, it's almost 10 o'clock at night. And again, I respect this body more than you know. I absolutely get that it's your decision to leave an item tabled, no problem. But if you know you're gonna leave the item tabled and there's 4 rows of staff sitting here, if you could just let them know that at 7 and not at 10, it just makes a huge difference, and I really appreciate that accommodation. And I regret not asking for it at 7 o'clock instead of at 10 o'clock myself, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Rodriguez.
So, if the homeless coordinator and the Susan Fint, the manager of finance, are they here to talk about that item? Okay, then.
Council President, is there a motion on the floor?
We do have a motion to deny it on the floor. Good evening.
Good evening, councilors. Sue Fink, Manager of Financial and Administrative Services. I live at 6 Rockwood Lane. I just wanted to give you some additional information about the Emergency Solutions Grants. So these funds can be used to rapidly rehouse individuals who have lost their housing due to fire, fleeing domestic violence, as well as those living in emergency shelters. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there are currently 13 ESG grantees: Boston, Cambridge, Fall River, Lawrence, Lowell, Lynn, New Bedford, Newton, Quincy, Somerville, Springfield, Worcester, and the state itself. The total funding from the federal government is just over $10.7 million to the Commonwealth, and Lawrence received the smallest grant, and it is $136,695. This funding would not be given directly to the clients, but would be paid directly to the landlords in the form of first, last, and security deposit, which is generally a huge hurdle for most people to overcome. If we use $4,000 as a base figure for serving a client under this grant, we can rehouse 31 individuals. This would free up much-needed beds in the shelters, which could be occupied by those who are living out on the street. The Lawrence program is designed for individuals who will be able to maintain their housing situation. They will need some form of income from employment or benefits such as SSI or SSDI. The Youth Forward Drop-In Center, which is located in the Everett Mill, serves young adults ages 16 to 25. And the director of the Lawrence Drop-In Center told me that currently they're serving 20 young adults from Lawrence who could benefit from the use of these funds. There currently is already an ESG program run in the city through Community Teamwork, or CTI, which is the CAP agency in Lowell. So that's a similar agency to Greater Lawrence Community Action Council. So as the director had indicated earlier, they've been using ESG and RAFT funds to assist Lawrence residents. They have a staff person who comes to GLCAC's office 2 days a week, and they've spent nearly $2 million since FY13 to rehouse 406 households for clients who reported their last zip code as a Lawrence zip code. Emmaus in Haverhill also serves homeless individuals and families from Lawrence. So this shows that work is being done on a regional basis to assist households that are from Lawrence. Economic development is a priority for Lawrence, as it is for every community. Businesses complain that there are homeless people hanging around outside their business, scaring the customers away. This funding can help get those folks off the street into a shelter, so that would help economic development. During the point-in-time count, as Nili had indicated, we counted 101 unsheltered individuals in Lawrence. We belong to the balance of state continuum of care, which is comprised of 76 communities. The entire balance of state had 169 homeless individuals unsheltered on that night. 101 of them were here in Lawrence. ESG funding is a critical piece of funding that can be used to help the most vulnerable people, and I really hope that you'll reconsider your decision on this grant.
Councilors, in addition to what Sue Fink just said, yes, this is a very valuable opportunity that we have for the city. This does not require anything from the city in a monetary meaning. The 100% match would have to come from the agency that responds to the RFR. So this comes at no cost to us as the municipality. In addition, there is a way that we can write this contract with our own standards. I know a lot of times we think about how do we help just those from Lawrence to maintain housing within Lawrence. I've been in contact with Alyssa Bresnan. She's the ESG coordinator for Department of Housing and Community Development, and stated, as a recipient of ESG, Lawrence will only have to establish written standards for your projects. In those standards, you could specify that your project will only serve City of Lawrence residents. You can define a resident in any way that you like. Our CES does not currently capture city or town origin or residence, but your project could screen out referrals that aren't able to document their residency once referred to your program. Essentially, residency or previous residency would become an eligibility requirement for this project. So there is a way that we can make sure that this goes to those that were previously living in Lawrence.
Councilor Rodriguez, Councilor Payano.
So we currently do not have a plan for this money.
No, we do not have a grant for this. It's been, when was the last time we got this? 2003.
Councilor Rodriguez, are you saying, do we, have we received grants like this in the past, or?
No, I plan to spend it.
Do we have a plan on how to spend this money?
Yes, it would be for first and last month's rent for homeless individuals that are in the coordinated entry system.
So basically, there is a guidelines from HUB, right?
Can you repeat that?
There is a guidance that we need to follow from the federal government, right?
Yes, but within those, we have our own standards that we as the city can define. So part of that would be making this funding only accessible to those that have lived in Lawrence previously before becoming homeless.
So, and are we violating the federal standards for this?
No, I consulted with the ESG coordinator at the Department of Housing and Community Development.
How we define somebody that is from Lawrence?
I like Councilor LaPlante's definition, somebody that previously lived here before losing their residency. If they spent an extended number of years or just time here in the city, I'd say that makes them one of our constituents.
So that's basically how the state define it?
No, it's up to us how we want to define it.
Because I hear, I don't know if that's true, 100% true, that once you spend 30 days in Lawrence, you're from here.
What was that?
Once you spend 30 days in Lawrence, you're from here already.
No, it's up to us how we want to define what residency within the city is.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I wanted to know exactly how we define it. And based on that, a lot of things might change.
If you'd like, we could do it from a 1-year minimum of living in Lawrence up to 5. It's really up to us as the municipality to decide what that means. And then we write that into the standards on our side of this contract.
When are we planning on having a plan on how to spend the money, perhaps, and on the guidance of somebody to apply for that money? Do we have that currently, or do we don't have it?
Yes, we do have that currently. It's for anybody that's put into the database as outlined by HUD through the coordinated entry system. A lot of our homeless on the street right now and in our shelters are in that system, so they are eligible for these funds.
Okay. And the grant mainly going to serve people from here?
Yes, it would be for Lawrence, that residents that previously held a residency within the city's limits.
How HUBs define the amount of money that they give out on those grants? Because I hear that Boston get like $20-something million.
Wait, can you repeat that question?
How the hubs define the amount of money given to any specific city?
It's based on largely our point-in-time count as well as our sheltered count as well. They identify those that have a certain need to approach this population based on our rise in numbers from the year before. You know, they saw more than a 50-person increase, so they thought that we were eligible.
Do you know why, or somebody have done some research in terms of why we didn't apply since 2003?
It wasn't a matter of applying, it's a matter of being rewarded.
Or perhaps why we didn't get our funds, I don't know.
We didn't have a point-in-time count as high as it was last year.
So last year was 101.
Excuse me?
Last year it was 101, right?
Yes.
In 2016 that was 45.
Yes.
So 45 is not enough.
Not compared to what we were doing with those 45. Now that they see that we've been putting forth somewhat of an effort, it also helps because seeing such a drastic increase in the point-in-time count does cause attention.
Okay, no more questions.
Councilor Payano.
Thank you, Councilor President. Before I ask questions, I'm just trying to understand the process. You mentioned that this was a motion to deny. Can you just explain that to me?
Can you repeat that again?
So when we, I think Councilor Plant asked, you know, what was the motion or something like that.
Motion to deny.
Is it motion to deny? I haven't heard that term.
So before this document was tabled, during the last city council meeting, Councilor Mark LaPlante made a motion to deny the document, and it was duly seconded by former Councilor Mayra Ortiz. So the motion that it's at the table right now that we're discussing is a motion to deny. You could either make a motion to approve or a motion to deny. So those are the choices that were presented.
So if you wanted to approve this motion, you would vote against it?
You will be voting against it.
So yes mean.
So voting, so let's assume that the question was to be called at this moment, and the motion as presented failed, no action has been taken yet. A motion to approve will have to be introduced to then be voted on.
Got it, okay. Thank you, Councilor President. So from listening to the presentation and listening what the grant is about, from what I'm understanding is that this grant is going to be used for certain individuals that have some type of income. So it's not necessarily the individuals that we see off in the street because you know, they're not currently working. And also to get, you know, like they're, not even SSSI, you know, would help, because that's, we're talking about, you know, maybe $600, $700. You know, rent right now in Lawrence, we're talking about $1,200 or, you know, or even higher. Also, you know, it sounds like there is a huge need for this. And the fact that this organization or the state is...
Motion to go past 10 p.m.
There's a motion on the floor. It's been properly seconded. In discussion. Seeing there's none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. You may continue, Councilor Payano.
Thank you. So I think this sounds very valuable. I mean, the fact that the state is granting us, or whoever the grantor is giving us this money, it sounds like the city is doing a better job at not just the count, but organizing the different agencies around there. Definitely, I think that we've noticed that there's some vacuums, there's some holes that need to be filled, but in general, it seems like the situation is improving somewhat, that they're giving us this low amount. You know, I guess so, just for a better understanding, so let's say we receive this grant, how do individuals have access to this? Would they go to you? Do they go to is there some other organization that we then give the money to?
So they can go to the agency that responds to the RFR that we approve, or they could go to their local agency that has case managers that are part of the system, and they could enter them into that system, making them applicable for these funds, so long as they have the residency, if we were to put that into the requirements. So yes, it would be accessible to any Lawrence resident that seeks services from DMH, DPH, or any of the shelters.
My next question is, one of the things that I found sometimes is difficult, especially when families are in a fire, is finding money for the first and last month rent. Because you spent, one, it was unexpected. You spent, every month you're paying rent already, so saving, $2,400 is not something that a lot of individuals can just come up with right away. So who do you foresee accessing this type of grant? Do you think there'd be individuals like that?
So with families, they get a lot of support through DTA, Department of Transitional Assistance, and they're applicable for home-based vouchers as well as RAFT, so that takes care of their first and last month's rent. It's the individuals that we find get pushed to the side. DTA no longer works with individuals, they only work with families, so this would be the individual that lost their home in the fire. This would be a person whose wife passed away and now they have to downsize. This would be a person trying to leave a domestic violence situation. This would be a homeless veteran. We have a lot of people in here in our system that have entered a need, and it's through, fires, domestic violence, trauma, PTSD, disability, whether it be physical or mental.
So I would say I used to work for DTA, and I say you're correct. They essentially focus, single mothers, families in general. But I think, one of the things that we sometimes don't notice is that, for example, let's say you get, laid off, fired, whatever, happens with your regular income. If you don't have any family in the area, you have nowhere to go. And especially when you're mentioning, I think, this would only help, 30 individuals as a drop in the bucket to, what we actually need. But at least it's helping someone. And, I would hate for us to not accept this money because I don't see that we lose anything by it. Thank you.
Councilor De La Cruz.
Yes, my question is, if somebody's coming out of jail, they usually come on the train from Boston to the city. I think they are considered to be homeless. Will that money be available for them too?
Could you repeat the question?
If somebody comes from out of jail, and they come into the city, are they considered homeless, and will they be able to get the money to pay the rent?
If they previously lived in Lawrence before their incarceration, possibly. It depends on the case managers who he is working with. But a lot of times the case manager and the agency has to make the call. If this person has a history of opioid abuse, they're not likely to refer them into this program to live here. But if it is somebody that has, no major felonies, if it's just misdemeanors or something small, then yes.
Councilor Ana Levy.
Thank you. So the money is going to be through DTA and CTI. So this is the two agencies that is going to manage the money?
No. This would be through an agency that responds to our request for response. So they would be interested in accepting the funds so long as they could match it 100%. It is not through DTA.
Okay. So, but it's going to be like the home-based program?
If there was a home base for individuals, then yes, it would be comparable to that.
So they're going to get like practically the first and the last month?
First, last, and security deposit.
Or they're going to get like some kind of grants for the whole year divided on the 12 months?
No, this is just for first and last month's
Just only
rents.
for the first and the last month? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor LaPlante.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear, 'cause there's some news here this evening that I was not aware of.
There's a lot of new things that we were not aware of.
Which is the fact that we can go ahead and, first of all, we can earmark the monies toward Lawrence residents however we decide to define a Lawrence resident. I mean, you made a phone call, that's fantastic, but if we're about to take a step in, I need something a little more substantive, just somebody in Boston in the McCormick building saying, or the Sol and Sol building saying, yep, that's good enough. Do you have anything written that makes sure, just so we don't look like we're, all of a sudden they say, oh, I'm sorry, you misunderstood that, Mr. Acosta?
Yes, I have correspondence and email.
Okay, so we have some sort of written record that can support that conversation. Okay. So a couple things. I don't recall that motion being made by me that had that one, but that's fine. I'm gonna take back that motion. I'm then going to make a motion to vote a favorable recommendation, support this with an amended part of my motion to mean that the individual to define a Lawrence resident was someone must have a Lawrence domicile for 1 year prior to be able to accept this money.
Motion has been made.
Second?
If I could
Sure.
get Council Plant to clarify, your motion is to allow,
I withdraw my
Withdraw
previous
the
motion,
first one.
then make a motion
to allow,
to allow
To allow
defining Lawrence
conditioned upon
the 1
homelessness
year.
being defined as.
as a Lawrence resident for 1 year.
1 year.
And
I
so
second
they
the
would need to
motion.
be able to show some sort of documentation that they were here for 1 year.
Yes, a mailing address of some sort or some proof through a healthcare agency.
It's been properly seconded by Councilor Reyes. I am extremely grateful that this discussion has been going on because we were about to approve a grant. We could have approved a grant that didn't have any restrictions on it. And I am, Councilor LaPlante, I know that in the Budget and Finance Committee, you were shocked when I said I am not supporting this because he had no restrictions. Now, for the first time, we're putting teeth to ensure that this will be for Lawrence residents because that's what we need. That is what we need. But I do want to see something in writing. I believe your judgments, but I want to be able to see something in writing myself. I am here representing the interests of the Lawrence residents and Lawrence residents only.
Yeah.
I will not allow anyone from outside of the city to tell me how to vote on any given issue. And I am now speaking to everyone from outside of the city of Lawrence who either emailed, called me, Facebooked me, tweeted me. I am not going to listen to you. I am here for Lawrence residents, okay? So you will not impact the way I vote at any capacity. What I wanted to see in this document is that it states that it's for Lawrence residents and Lawrence residents only. That's how I am going to be supporting it. Okay? So, Councilor LaPlante, I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to speak at the Budget and Finance Committee against this document as it was presented, because that's not what we need in our city.
Good.
In our city, we need to be clear about the services that we're providing, and the services that we're going to provide are for our folks, for the individuals that live here, the individuals that need services here. We're going to stand up for them. We cannot allow folks from other communities just to bombard us with other folks here. No. I'm not going to support that. But I want to be able to see it in writing. If it's not in writing tonight, I will not be voting in support of it. I'm sorry? It's part of the motion, yeah. But I haven't seen the documentation in writing by the state. Yeah, so
I'd like to amend my own motion, Council
And I
President.
second it.
So to make the passage of this contingent upon you sending us the documentation with that recommendation. So if you do that as quickly as tomorrow, we satisfy it, and then we're good
Yeah.
to go.
Yep.
I can get that to you tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
And send it to all the councils, if you don't mind, because I think, through you,
Yes.
Mr. President.
So the
Or at least
motion
the President, he can send it to us,
Approve
but.
pending the language?
So it is pending the language. If the language is not,
Language of Lawrence resident only.
Lawrence residents only. That's how, at least that's my take on it. I have Councilor Levy first.
It's a point of information.
No. No.
All set? Councilor Payano.
So it was a question. The motion, as it stated, is it not is it Lawrence residents only, or that they've been a Lawrence resident as far as a year ago?
My motion is that Mr. Costa suggested that there was a phone conversation and a follow-up email that said that if, however we want to determine how we define a Lawrence resident, the state was good with it. So even though it's a federal grant, which is a whole different, is it the federal or it's a federal grant?
It's a federal grant.
It's from
So you're talking
HUD.
to the federal, not the folks in,
Yes.
okay.
It's a federal grant.
I mean, I could read that excerpt from the email again, if it would clarify.
Yeah?
That will be helpful.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
that would be.
According to Alyssa Bresnahan, the ESG coordinator for the DHCD stated, as a recipient of ESG, Lawrence will also have to establish written standards for your projects. In those standards, you could specify that your project will only serve City of Lawrence residents.
Okay.
You can define resident in any way that you like. Our CES does not currently capture, coordinated entry system, does not currently capture city, town of residents, but your project could screen out referrals that aren't able to document their residency once referred to your program. Essentially, residency would become an eligibility requirement for your project.
Right.
Mr. Acosta,
To you,
can you forward that to me right now? That way our secretary will print it for all of us?
Or just give the copy of it, just print it.
Just make a copy.
Oh, you have a hard copy there?
Yeah, he has.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
this
if you have a
is
hard
just,
copy, yes.
This is an excerpt from
Okay.
that. This isn't the actual email. Do you want
Okay.
me, I could email you the actual.
If you have it in print right now, let's give it to us.
Okay.
That way, we don't even have to wait for it. We could just approve it as is.
Just kind of move on with that.
To you, Council President, just to clarify a few things.
Okay? Councilor Payano had his hand
Okay.
up first.
Thank you, Council President. I think in the future, it'd be great for us to see what other requirements you put in this grant, because I think from what you talked about in your report, homelessness is very broad, and the individuals affected by it are broad as well. So I would think to ensure that this money is being spent efficiently and is being spent well, you probably want to define who is being served, not just by the city that they live in, obviously Lawrence, but whether they're young people or whatever it might be.
Okay. Councilor Rodriguez.
So just to clarify a few things, So we are defining a Lawrence resident, am I right? Somebody that lived here prior to become homeless for a year,
For a minimum of 1 year.
minimum for a year. So is that the motion or that's a?
That's part of the motion by
That's part
Councilor.
of the motion, and the second part of the motion is to approve pending the language.
Well, we may not need
So we
that.
have the language now.
We have the language now, so
We don't have the
it's
language.
to approve and defining what Lawrence residence means. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Councilor De La Cruz.
It would be nice if most of those students who are high school students that you mentioned, that they could be put on that list too, because it means that they don't have a place to live at this moment.
If the student is under 18, then they can't live by themselves, but for those that are homeless that go to Youth Forward or Youth Drop-In, they are put in the coordinated entry system.
What about their family?
The families, that's through DTA. That's through Department of Transitional Assistance. They provide the referrals, the home base, and the RAFT program.
Then you're saying that somebody at the age of 18, they cannot have an apartment by their own?
Correct.
They have to be how old?
18. They can't be under 18.
Councilors, any further questions or comments? And there's none.
So I want to
Councilor
withdraw my
LaPlante?
motion to ask the documentation. We're satisfied? Okay, thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Once again, thank you very much for providing a healthy discussion on this subject because it was necessary in the city of Lawrence. It was approved.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
It's been properly second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it.